Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, welcome to the Economic Ideas Forum, the edition of 2017. We at the Wilfred Martens Center are very happy that you are here today, be it in this room or if you're watching us online in front of your computers. Last year, the Wilfred Martens Center has been awarded with the Excellence Award for the best political conference. So as you can imagine, the stakes for this year's event are very high, but we're convinced that with your help and with the participation of our excellent speakers, we'll have another fantastic event. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to kick off this event, the president of the Wilfred Martens Center, Mikuláš Dzurinda.
Thank you very much, Katarina. Dear President Daul, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome you all to the Economic Ideas Forum, organized, as was already mentioned, by the Wilfred Martens Center for European Studies in cooperation with the European People's Party and with great support of our sponsors, UPS, Disney, AT&T, and Sky. As we are at the economic conference, allow me to start with some numbers. This year, it is already the 8th edition of this ambitious conference. Furthermore, it is my pleasure to inform you that the Economic Ideas Forum was awarded the title of #1 or the Best Political Congress of 2016 at the European Excellence Awards. Thank you. Another opportunity for your applause is the fact that our think tank is celebrating the 10-year anniversary of its existence this year. And last but not least, we are also marking the 60th anniversary of the Rome Treaties. All these occasions are very good opportunities to celebrate. But it is also a good opportunity for us to come up with new ideas, with novel initiatives that will contribute to a debate on the future of our economical and political future on this continent. We launched Economic Ideas Forum at a time when the European economy was in a fragile and quite uncertain situation caused by the economic and financial crisis. Today, we can witness that a growth has slowly returned to national economies. Greece and Portugal are back from the brink of economic collapse. Deficit has decreased and employment is slowly increasing. Behind this recovery are a few ambitious plans and huge political will to return our economy to a global scene, to make it more prosperous and to restore its confidence. One of these plans is the investment plan for Europe that we will discuss later and which has already helped over 460,000 European SMEs make their business more competitive, and create new jobs as well. But we should not rest on our laurels. Economic uncertainty remains. We face fresh challenges compounded by political instability. For example, Brexit. Technological boom constitutes another challenge, which has permeated all levels of society and will obviously have an indisputable impact on all areas of our life in the future. Completing the single market is also necessary to unlock the EU's growth potential. Last but not least, globalization. Globalization should not be taken as a scarecrow or used to highlight our failures, but as an accelerator that allows us to develop a prosperous environment in Europe. Besides that, the conference will focus on other aspects of economic development, such as a safe online environment or the new patterns of work and welfare. Like every year, we try to bring the best experts and business leaders. I am very glad that this year's politicians from the EU institutions and member states will also participate. So I believe that this combination of speakers will ensure that the Economic Ideas Forum becomes a platform to propose how we can continue to run at the front of the pack. I would like to thank President Daul and the EPP colleagues for their cooperation in making this conference possible. Once again, enjoy the debate and welcome to the Economic Ideas Forum. Thank you.
Thank you, President, for your inspiring words. And let us now open the floor to the President of the European People's Party, Joseph Daul. Monsieur le Président, vous avez la parole.
Cher Président Dzurinda, cher Mikuláš, chers intervenants, Mesdames et Messieurs, c'est un plaisir pour moi d'ouvrir cette 8e édition de l'Economic Ideas Forum. Au cours des années, j'ai vu grandir et évoluer ce concept qui est devenu non seulement un des événements phares du Martens Center, mais aussi un rendez-vous à ne pas manquer pour tous ceux et celles qui veulent échanger, écouter des analyses lucides, des idées novatrices sur les grands défis auxquels font face nos économies. Cette année aussi, l'EIF promet des débats intéressants de haut niveau. Permettez-moi d'abord de féliciter le Martens Center et son staff pour l'organisation de ce forum qui leur a d'ailleurs valu, comme tu l'as dit, cette année le prestigieux European Excellence Award. Mais il y a une autre raison de féliciter le Martens Center. Il n'a que 10 ans, mais des véritables 10 années et le travail extraordinaire que vous accomplissez. Un anniversaire, c'est toujours l'occasion de faire le bilan du passé, mais surtout aussi se projeter vers l'avenir. Et c'est ce que le Martens Center a décidé de faire en centrant les débats de cette année autour du thème « Nouvelle Europe, nouvelle économie ». Chers amis, je suis généralement quelqu'un de positif. Laissez-moi commencer par les bonnes nouvelles. Car certes, nous avons encore besoin et nous avons un chemin à faire pour assurer la prospérité de notre continent, de nos citoyens à l'avenir, mais nous ne partons certainement pas de zéro. Ces 2 dernières années, nous avons enregistré une croissance plus forte que celle des États-Unis. Nous avons créé 8 millions d'emplois depuis 2014 et le taux d'emploi dans l'Union a atteint un niveau record de 71,1% en 2016. Mais grâce à notre plan d'investissement, nous avons généré 225 milliards d'euros d'investissements qui ont profité à un demi-million de PME. Bien sûr, il reste des événements, des éléments de préoccupation, comme la fragilité du système bancaire italien et d'autres, ou les taux de chômage encore trop élevés dans certains de nos pays membres. Et je pense surtout, quand je regarde la salle, au chômage des jeunes, que je trouve particulièrement inquiétant, car nous mettons par là en danger notre propre futur. Mais nous ne pouvons recommencer à regarder l'avenir avec plus de confiance, car l'Europe a enfin retrouvé le chemin de la croissance. Que reste-t-il à faire pour consolider cette croissance et surtout faire en sorte que tous nos concitoyens puissent en profiter et en ressentir les bénéfices dans leur vie de tous les jours? Ça doit être la réflexion aussi de ce jour. Il ne faut pas laisser de côté des gens, et il ne faut pas, ce que je vois de plus en plus quand je vais dans les Balkans, que le fossé se creuse entre les élites et les citoyens de base. Ça, il faut absolument veiller à ce que cela et que ce développement et qu'au niveau du social, nous pensions à ça au niveau du PPE. Et que reste-t-il donc à faire pour consolider cette croissance et surtout faire en sorte que tous nos concitoyens puissent en profiter et en ressentir les bénéfices dans leur vie de tous les jours? En tant que PPE, nous voulons nous concentrer sur les réformes qui recèlent le plus grand potentiel de croissance et de création d'emplois, sans toutefois oublier les leçons tirées de la crise, car celui qui oublie son passé est condamné à répéter les mêmes erreurs. 3 en sont le domaine des réformes prioritaires. D'abord, et tu en as parlé, le marché unique. Depuis mes premiers pas sur la scène politique européenne, j'ai toujours entendu parler d'achèvement du marché unique. Mais cela ne s'est pas encore concrétisé. Nous avons progressé, certes, mais trop lentement et de façon trop fragmentée, secteur par secteur. Nous devons maintenant passer la vitesse et agir de plus en plus en profondeur. Trop de projets restent inachevés. Marché unique des capitaux, des services, du numérique, l'union énergétique. Compléter tous ces projets nous permettrait de générer 1 000 milliards d'euros de PIB et de créer des millions d'emplois. C'est une opportunité que nous ne pouvons pas rater. Et deuxièmement, la prospérité de notre continent se fonde largement sur le commerce. S'il semble aujourd'hui difficile de parvenir à un accord commercial avec l'administration américaine, il y a plein d'autres opportunités à saisir et qui pourraient profiter aux compagnies européennes. Et je me réjouis donc des accords conclus avec le Canada, le Japon, 2 pays qui partagent nos valeurs et notre vision. Et j'espère que d'autres vont bientôt suivre. Et je crois qu'il ne faut pas avoir peur d'expliquer à nos concitoyens que c'est nécessaire de s'ouvrir au monde. Car si nous ne le faisons pas, nos compétiteurs vont conclure des accords sans nous et ensuite nous imposer leurs standards. Et attention, ne perdons pas de vue l'intérêt de nos entreprises, y compris nos entreprises agricoles fondamentales pour la viabilité de nos économies. Et il y a un autre phénomène, je vous le dis aujourd'hui, prenez-le, la sécurité alimentaire. J'avais des responsables chinois dans mon bureau il y a 15 jours qui sont venus me demander, Président, on ne vient pas aujourd'hui en tant que président du PPE, on vient vous voir en tant qu'agriculteur. Il nous faut 700 000 tonnes de viande l'année prochaine. J'ai dit, Monsieur l'ambassadeur, vous vous êtes trompé de zéro. 70 000, 50 000, 70 000, c'est déjà énorme. Et après, il a retéléphoné et il est revenu. Il m'a dit non. Nous sommes en train d'ouvrir des McDonald's dans nos petites villes de 30 millions d'habitants et ça va faire 700 000 tonnes de viande en plus pour l'année prochaine pour fournir les McDo au niveau de la Chine. Et là, la petite boutade que je raconte tous les jours, si vous faites le calcul, si chaque Chinois boit un verre de vin par jour, non, par semaine, non, par jour, excusez-moi, ça serait trop. Par semaine, il n'y a plus aucune bouteille de disponible dans le monde. Alors faites vos réserves. Mais je crois que là aussi, il faut qu'on se repose les bonnes questions. Donc, nous devons les protéger, nous devons assurer la compétitivité de nos entreprises sur la scène internationale et toujours en promouvant un commerce libre, juste et basé sur des règles communes et qui soit respecté par tous. L'Europe est un continent d'entrepreneurs et nous devons leur assurer les meilleures conditions pour démarrer et faire croître leurs entreprises. Ils ont déjà les bonnes idées, ils ont la persévérance, mais ils ont aussi besoin du financement, que ce soit sous forme de prêts bancaires ou d'investissements de capitaux. Sans cela, leurs bonnes idées ne verront pas le jour. Et le Fonds européen pour les investissements stratégiques a aidé beaucoup de nos PME à accéder au financement bancaire à travers son système de garantie. Ce dont nous avons besoin maintenant, ce sont des politiques qui améliorent la disponibilité des financements du risque pour nos entreprises. C'est aussi important pour elles que pour un Français le fromage et le bon vin. Sans cela, elles ne peuvent pas survivre. Et c'est un réel problème pour nos petites et moyennes entreprises. Je ne sais pas s'il y en a dans cette salle. Vous le savez, aujourd'hui, la frilosité des banques au niveau du financement des projets des petites et moyennes entreprises. Le PPE est le mieux placé pour répondre aux attentes de nos citoyens dans ces 3 domaines. Nous sommes le parti de ceux qui travaillent dur pour améliorer leur vie, la vie de ceux qui les entourent et la société dans son ensemble. Nous sommes ceux qui soutiennent les entreprises, car ce sont elles, et non pas les États ou les institutions, qui créent des emplois. Nous sommes ceux qui croient dans la liberté individuelle, l'esprit d'entreprise, le libre marché, mais aussi l'importance de protéger les plus faibles et leur donner les moyens de réussir. Nous sommes le parti de l'économie sociale de marché. Je le répète tous les jours. Bien sûr de l'économie, mais aussi de l'économie sociale de marché. Mes amis, je l'ai dit, nous ne pouvons pas aller de l'avant si nous oublions notre passé, si nous oublions les leçons que la crise économique et financière nous a si durement imparties. Cette crise a révélé les faiblesses de notre système et nous devons travailler pour être mieux préparés face aux chocs futurs. Ma première réunion ce matin, c'était avec les ministres des Finances du PPE. Et nous savons, et les spécialistes, et il y en a sûrement parmi vous, nous disent que nous vivons actuellement dans une bulle et que cette bulle va exploser entre 2020 et 2025. Alors je ne sais pas si c'est vrai, mais moi j'ai une expérience de la gestion de crise et je dis toujours, les catastrophes qui sont annoncées n'arrivent jamais. Parce qu'une catastrophe, elle arrive parce qu'elle n'est pas annoncée. Alors j'espère que si on annonce aujourd'hui que cette bulle où nous vivons, nous sommes sous oxygène, comme me disent les spécialistes, et que cette bulle, aujourd'hui, nous allons essayer pour qu'elle n'explose pas, puisque la catastrophe est annoncée. D'abord, il est crucial de mettre en œuvre une séparation réelle entre les États et leurs banques. Nous devons faire en sorte que les institutions financières ne puissent plus jouer avec la vie de nos concitoyens, comme elles l'ont fait par le passé. Cette réforme est fondamentale pour la résilience et la stabilité de notre système, mais au-delà, c'est une question aussi de justice. Nos concitoyens ont injustement fait les frais des erreurs de quelques brokers irresponsables et nous devons faire en sorte que cela ne se reproduise plus. Deuxièmement, nous ne devons pas oublier que les États les plus frappés par la crise ont été ceux qui n'avaient pas leurs finances en ordre, qui dépensaient de l'argent qu'ils n'avaient pas et qui étaient donc plus vulnérables aux spéculations, qui n'avaient pas la marge de manœuvre nécessaire pour faire face à la crise. Le PPE soutient la justice sociale, mais avant de redistribuer les richesses, il faut d'abord les produire. Pensons à nos enfants. Ne jouons pas avec le futur en les accablant de dettes. Nous devons maintenir nos déficits au plus bas, réduire nos dettes et décourager un endettement excessif de la part des entreprises et des ménages. Et tout cela, c'est notre mission en tant que PPE. Et qui d'autre pourrait réussir? Les socialistes ne semblent pas se soucier de cumuler les dettes qui mettent en danger le futur de nos enfants. Les populistes ne font que pointer les problèmes sans proposer des solutions réalistes. Ils détruisent sans rien construire à la place. Nous le voyons avec le Brexit. Le référendum terminé, M. Farage démissionne. C'est à nous qu'incombe la responsabilité d'assurer l'avenir de nos économies, de nos pays et de nos citoyens. Pour réussir, nous devons être à la fois humbles, mais ambitieux. Assez humbles pour ne pas être aveugles face à nos faiblesses et apprendre les erreurs du passé, mais aussi ambitieux pour ne pas être paralysés par la peur des changements et avoir le courage de faire les réformes nécessaires pour créer des emplois et de prospérité. Je souhaite donc qu'aujourd'hui, dans votre débat, vous ayez attaqué très clairement, allez-y, Défoulez-vous aujourd'hui, c'est le moment, c'est le rôle du Martens Center et c'est le rôle aussi de cette réunion d'aujourd'hui pour nous proposer des solutions. Merci de m'avoir écouté.
Thank you, Presidents, for your excellent speeches and for your inspiring words. But now, dear ladies and gentlemen, it's time that we start with our discussions. And it's time that we start with our first debate. Our first debate, entitled Surf, Safe and Secure, an Economic Perspective, we would like to talk in this first panel debate about technological change. As you know, over a decade, the internet has been affected every aspect of our life. It has affected how we talk to each other, it has affected how we think, how we form opinions, and also how we consume news. Of course, the internet has also brought us a lot of advantages, but also some disadvantages, because some actors may use the internet in a bad way or with a bad intention. So let's see what our speakers of today think about it. What shall we do? Shall we regulate the internet, or shall we let it slide and let it sort by itself? So allow me to introduce our speakers in the panel 1 today. We have here Juho Romakkaniemi, Head of Cabinet of Commission, Vice President for Jobs, Growth, Investment and Competitiveness. We also have here today Andreas Schwab, MEP, Committee on the Internal Market and Consumer Protection. We also have here today Dara Murphy, the EPP Vice President and recently nominated the EPP Campaign Director for the European elections of 2019, MP and also former Irish EU Affairs Minister. Last but not least, we also have here David Wheeldon, Group Director of Policy and Public Affairs at Sky. Of course, we have our fantastic moderator, Gonçalo Carriço, who will be moderating and managing this discussion, EPP Political Advisor for Innovation, Technology and Digital Policy. I would just want to quickly remind the speakers that you have been informed. You have a limited short time to speak, so in order to make sure that everyone can participate and discuss, we have 4 totems across the room. So when you're going to hear an annoying sound, when you're going to see a flashing light, you know that it's time to wrap up and give the floor to the next speaker. Gonçalo, you have the floor.
Thank you. Let me first start to congratulate the Martens Center for assembling another great event with a fantastic setup again. So in today's panel, Surf, Safe and Secure, an Economic Perspective, we're going to discuss the growing trend of attempting to regulate the digital sector. I would like to start to speak about data. So it has been said that data is the currency of today's digital economy. According to some estimates, the value of the European citizens' personal data has the potential to grow to nearly 1 trillion euros annually by 2020. So starting with Dara, as a former minister responsible for data protection, could you tell us if the data protection regulation will create business opportunities while strengthening citizens' fundamental rights, or it was just stifling innovation with regulation? What do you think about it?
Okay, thank you very much. Great pleasure to be here, Presidents. Yes, I was actually Europe's first Minister for Data Protection, and I will be rewarded in the next life, I'm sure, for the 3 years of working through the General Data Protection Regulation. To answer your question, will the GDPR, the new regulation, stifle business? The answer to that is no. And the reason it won't is because we are starting from such a low base. 1995 was the last European law, the Data Protection Directive. And since 1995, in 1998, Google came along, 2006, Twitter, Spotify, and only a few years ago, Uber. So we were in Europe with 28 different sets of laws. In fact, in Germany, 16 landed with different data rules, and we were absolutely behind the curve with respect to regulating European business. So the new data protection regulation will, in fact, I think, change an awful lot for the better. And you are right, the question is, how do we get balance? Balance between protecting our citizens' data and privacy is, of course, an extremely important part of the fabric of European ideology, but also allowing Europe to flourish and not continue to be left behind in this new data and digital age, which I think, if we're honest with ourselves, we have been left behind. Gordon Moore, the co-founder of Intel, said in 1965, Moore's Law, that the capacity of the microchip to store data would double every year. That has continued up to 2017. Data, of course, isn't new. What is new is the capacity to store it, to interpret it, to sell it, to monetize it, and to steal it. And some of the new elements of the data protection regulation will allow, particularly with respect to the fact that businesses, and a crucial point here is we're talking about the SME sector in Europe. Multinational corporations can step around individual national rules. It is our own indigenous businesses, European businesses, that will benefit. The new rules will apply to businesses that trade into Europe. All Europeans' data will be protected, whether the businesses are located in Europe, whether they're in the United States, whether they're in the UK in the future. There'll be far greater levels of consent, so citizens will have much more control over what their data is used for, how it is shared, how it is interpreted, how it is sold. And there will be much stiffer penalties for companies that do not notify for breaches. In fact, up to 4% of global turnover, 20 million euro, whichever is the greater. And citizens finally will have much greater access to data. The one concern I would have, and this, Gonçalo, and I'll finish on this point, is back to stifling, is that the idea was that there would be one point of access for citizens across our continent with respect to data, the concept of the one-stop shop. And that may be, under the current rules, a little bit cumbersome, but we will have to see how that works out. So in parallel with the digital single market suite of priorities that we have from our Commission, I think we have seen huge progress. Remember, we are still existing under the old rules. There's 198 days, 25th of May 2018, that the new rules will come in. So we've only agreed them. We're not seeing them in effect yet. So I think this is a huge leap forward and another success story, if I may say, coming from the European People's Party-led European Union that we should be very, very proud of.
Completely agree with that one. I will now turn to another relevant issue on this topic. And I will start to quote President Juncker, but he said that cyber attacks can be more dangerous to the stability of democracy and economies than guns and tanks. In fact, and taking the economic dimension, the impact of cybercrime rose fivefold from 2013 to 2017 and could further rise by a factor of 4 by 2019. A recent report even said that it's estimated that a serious cyber attack could cost the global economy more than 100 billion euros. So turning now to Andreas, that was the main driver, the first piece of EU legislation on cybersecurity at the European Parliament. Do you think this NIS directive will be enough to prevent this economic loss driven by cyber attacks that I just mentioned?
First of all, thank you for the invitation, Presidents. I think Dara did a very good introduction by balancing the consequences of such directives. I fear that I can't be that positively balanced as Dara has been, because, fairly speaking, everyone complains about the risks of cyber attacks. Everyone explains that there is a high risk, but the problem is we should have started the action already, and we have to compare ourselves in a globalized world to other countries. And if you compare the European Union in total to the Americans, we see that in Europe there are some hundreds of millions spent on cybersecurity by 2020, and in the US some billions. And even the figures are in a strong difference, and therefore it's obvious that Europe will remain, unfortunately, much stronger exposed to all these risks than beforehand, and much stronger than the Americans will be, because they invest much more on the protection against cyber attacks. And I think that's frightening, because it's not we don't miss in a certain way the analysis. We don't do not enough, let's say, studies on where the risks are coming from. But what we don't do is to turn to action. And that's a problem in the European Union. That's a task for the member states. And unfortunately, there is not set enough money aside for investments in cyber protection, in cyber security. And the same applies a little bit also for private companies. And therefore, that's very difficult. There is one reason where we have further to work on, and that's the point on what is the best tool to prevent cyber attacks. And there is not any, let's say, tool that you can buy quickly, a machine or something. You have to do it by procedural standards, and these procedural standards have not yet been authorized, have not yet been elaborated, and therefore there is still a certain problem here. That's true, but the European Commission is about to come up with proposals on this, and therefore we hope that with these proposals on the table, we can really invest on more cybersecurity.
Thank you. Well, speaking about investments in cybersecurity, the European Commission has, from 2014 to 2020 period, the European Structural Investment Funds foresee a contribution of up to 4 million for investments on trust and security. It is mentioned that the ESI funds can finance security and data protection to enhance interoperability, interconnection of digital infrastructures, electronic identification, privacy, and trust on services online. Juho, I'm now turning to you. Are these foreseen investments on trust and cybersecurity have been played out so far?
Yes, thank you for the invitation. Very much very interesting to hear what the other panelists, Dara and Andreas, are telling about the data and cybersecurity. I will comment those areas as well. Because we just also reformed the EU's cybersecurity strategy in September with the Commission. We strengthened the role of the ENISA, our agency. We are looking closer cooperation in the cyber defense, because this is a bit of a gray area as well, where the cybersecurity in the conventional meaning ends and where it's a military or defense issue in the end of the day. So that we are trying to build these coherent links for action in all levels, and building for the next MFF as well. Because there's clear need to work with the member states, regions, cities, and private companies coherently. And this requires a huge amount of invest to cyber resilience, upgrading the infrastructure. Attacks in the digital world can be local, but spread around the Europe immediately. So, coming to your question here, regarding the structural funds, the cybersecurity has been one of the key sectors of smart specialization and the priority for several regions. And the cybersecurity funding can be addressed in the smart specialization platform of industrial modernization. Of course, in line with our new strategy, we are looking for possibility to really start building a more thematic the cybersecurity platform as well. I can't help mentioning that the role of our new financial instruments is of course important. The next session here is about the Juncker plan and European Fund for Strategic Investments, but the digital infrastructure, including the cybersecurity and resilience investments, has been one of the key sectors in the FC fund, and it has been alongside with the climate and energy transition being one of the biggest the goal of investments until now. But this is about the investments and the security side, but I have to comment on data as well, because I heard the chairman of the board of Nokia, Alcatel-Lucent, Risto Siilasmaa, was giving the presentation on artificial intelligence the 2 weeks ago in Commission, and he started it by saying that the data is the next oil. And I thought that he was wrong, because it is already more important and has been more important. I'll give you an example. Out of the 10 companies, biggest companies by market cap in the world in 2006, out of those, 5 were oil companies, 1 tech company, and by the way, 2 European companies. Last year, 10 years after that, 5 were data-driven companies, 1, 2, 3 being Apple, Google, and Microsoft, by the way. 1 oil company left, ExxonMobil, which was biggest 10 years ago, and 0 European companies. So data has been the next oil already for a while, and I have to agree with Dana Murphy that we are lagging behind in this economy with Asia and US, and what to do to fill that gap and get the advantage over those. That's the big question.
Thank you. Well, actually, speaking about AI, yesterday Stephen Hawking just alerted for the dangers of the AI to humanity if we don't take it right. So that's a very good point. And to speaking about cyber defense that you mentioned, there is a fantastic paper outside from the Martens Center. You can check it out. I guess you will immediately see who wrote it. So turning now to the private sector and to another very important issue, social media platforms. We all know that internet has dramatically lower entry barriers for media, shifting advertising revenues. But it also led to a shift in consumers' reading habits in terms of trustworthy news, so-called fake news. So in your opinion, should EU pass legislation that holds Facebook, Twitter, and so on, companies accountable for what their platforms are used for? What is your opinion about it?
Thank you, Gonçalo. I appreciate, as being a Brit in these kind of fora, I'm an object of some curiosity these days. But I can reassure you that I represent a company that is in 6 European markets, 5 of which will remain in the European Union post-Brexit. So we're here talking about European policy. The perspective I come from the TV business, is very much thinking about the way that regulation affects our industry. If you look at the scale of the laws that we are required to follow, they are really quite significant compared with almost any other sector. In the UK, there are 400 pages of laws in the Communications Act. In Germany, there are 16 different regulators and media authorities. And we've operated under those circumstances forever, for many years, ever since the dawn of the TV age. There have been rules, there have been state interventions, there have been public broadcasters. And I think that consumers and customers and viewers are very used to the fact that we are a place in which they go to, which is properly regulated, that follows codes that they're used to, that they understand, and that protect them, that give them some sense that there is an authority to the content that they see on the screen, in their living rooms, in their bedrooms, on their devices increasingly. But of course, in the media, in the internet age, those devices, those screens in the living room and in the bedroom, they're shared spaces. They're no longer solely the home of the regulated businesses like ours. You sit alongside the content from TV companies, the news providers like ourselves, a whole bunch of services that don't face any of those responsibilities and regulations. Now, I'm not calling the companies that provide that content and those services irresponsible. That's not what I'm saying. But there is a complete disparity in the regulatory frameworks that affects the content that people are receiving into their living rooms, into their bedrooms, onto their devices. And I think I would argue that is not a sustainable situation going forwards. And we've seen the problems with fake news, we've seen the problems with extremism, we've seen a lot of the issues that are rising around social media in the last few years. You do not see that on television. And I have to say that the argument that says that somehow taking action to require companies to be more responsible for what is placed on their platforms, and that is responsibility for things that are uploaded rather than taking responsibility to take things down, doesn't have to be the end of the internet world. And we do hear this quite often, that this will break the internet. The fact of the matter is, I'm proud of the fact that I represent a company that has helped people to express their views, has contributed to free speech, but does operate in a very regulated and responsible way. And therefore, I think that the binary argument that rules and regulations around the internet are somehow going to fundamentally undermine democracy and free speech, somewhat tenuous, given where we come from. Therefore, I do think this is on the table, and I do think that the next Commission is going to have to start looking at the full panoply of digital regulation, and that includes the e-commerce directive, which thus far no one has dared to touch. But the idea that that is going to be sustainable for another 10 years does seem to me to be rather extraordinary.
Let me open now the floor to the audience, if there is any questions about these topics. There is one there. Do we have mics? Could you please be brief and straight to the question?
Stasinopoulos, formally with the European Commission. I think I would like to bring to the forum the attention to another issue, which has not been touched, if I'm not mistaken, by the panel. Are we in the middle of a power, in the middle of a battle for power in the cyberspace between two sides? On the one side is the governments, public authorities, and the large multinational technology companies and media companies. On the other side are the interest groups, consumer groups. Even I could include in that side hackers as well. And the internet at the beginning empowered, I would say, the second group more, because they gave them a place to coordinate. And we saw some results, actually, the impact. And then, but slowly, my own feeling in, and I would like to ask the panel if it's possible to respond, whether now the tide is shifting towards, or the power, towards government and multinational companies. For me, how these two sides fare in the long term, it's of vital importance for Europe and for the world.
Another one here. I will just...
Yeah, since we are in an ideas forum, allow me to be a bit provocative. We have the Security Council of the UN, who deals with security issues, but we don't have a global cyber governance board. So this is my proposition. Wouldn't be highly time to have such a board with all the participants from China, from US, from Europe, because we are in it together. So this is also a power game on a very high level, and who says fake news says also fake data.
Thank you. The last one, then I will pass it over.
If you speak about cybersecurity, about data, about money, what about bitcoins? Is it really money or not? What do you think about it?
Okay. Who wants to... I will hold it for a minute. Who wants to answer to the first three questions?
No, only the first question.
The first one, okay.
Now, I think we are not in a battle here, but what we definitely have in front of us is a very uneven competition, a very uneven level playing field, and I think our friend has pointed perfectly out that we are not yet able to find a system where we can really integrate every player in a similar manner. We have discussed it, by the way, on the Audiovisual Media Services Directive, but so we have adapted the European framework for the new age that has already been started. But we haven't been able to take it to the last step, saying that similar information has to be treated similarly in legislation. And in a certain way, what we see in platforms is a news aggregation without any, let's say, control of a publisher that takes a personal responsibility for the truth of what is published. And if this sort of information is privileged legally, we run a big risk that even any global conference, any global setting can fix it, because there is no control of it. It's a freedom of expression that is the only reason for this. And therefore, we have to make sure that we really find a system where we treat identical approaches to the public in an identical way of regulation. And unfortunately, so far, we haven't been able to get there totally. We have made a little step, but as has been said, it's probably not enough.
Not enough.
I can take the second question, perhaps, briefly. I mean, you're 100% correct. I mean, the more we can do on a global level to combat, the threats from the cyber threats, the threats that we have, given the new age we're living in, the better. But we also have to acknowledge that there are many parts of our world that are either ambiguous towards these threats, and in the case of certain countries, particularly close to us in the east of our continent, who are actively participating and using the internet for their own political advantage. So what we have to do is to focus on what we collectively in the European Union can achieve with respect to battling. And Andreas is correct. I mean, we do need to do more in the space of cybersecurity. And again, the data protection regulation, that is a body of law that has set global standards. American companies now take, in America, EU standards because it's easier to apply them in both markets. So we have shown in the past that we can actually come up with regulations that will be accepted globally. We have a history in our continent of doing that. And even though economically we are becoming proportionately smaller, we shouldn't underestimate our capacity to give real leadership with respect to regulation. And where we can get global support for new cybersecurity laws through the United Nations, excellent. But where we can't, then we must paddle our own canoe here in Europe, either with cooperation with NATO, or if it has to be on our own in the European Union, then so be it as well.
I think this gentleman here has really put the nail on the head. I really do think there is a very clear imperative for the consumer groups and individuals to be asking of governments, what are you doing to ensure there is some proper regulation in this space? And ironically, many of them would say, we are the antithesis to that argument. We believe in freedom. You're trying to regulate the internet. But wait a minute. The measures that are being pursued at the moment are all about voluntary offers and self-regulation. We even have phrases offered by the internet firms like Good Samaritan. And the Good Samaritan was an innocent passerby. I'm not sure the analogy holds. But the point is that there is no proper oversight of the interventions that they are making onto their platforms to control the information, to restrict or to take down what people can say. We're all saying there needs to be some kind of rule of law there, but it is the rule of law rather than some kind of voluntary measure that doesn't have proper oversight. And I think proper oversight and transparency are the watchwords for this debate going forwards. And I would hope that the consumer groups would understand actually that it's in consumers' interests to have that and to have proper democratic oversight over these things rather than simply a voluntary offer by global powerhouses.
You want to jump on the Bitcoin question? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, if I may to say something on the Bitcoins and the interesting... I'm a philosopher by training, so I can say that the money is nothing but the social construction in the end of the day. So Bitcoin is as real as other currencies, as real as euro, as long as the people believe in it. But of course, as the model is very new, there are no institutions and political will backing behind. So the jury is still out there. Remains to be seen how it will last. It's really first crisis in the future that will come.
Thank you so much. I think there was another question in that side. Thank you. There first, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I am Alice Baker. I studied French and Italian, and I was, as a youngster, in Poland in communist time. So I was very happy there was no communism anymore. And I think now we should redefine Europe, and in East and West it should be together. And I'm also a daughter of a clergyman. And now I have they married my Dutch children. They married a Spanish boy and a girl. So we have a fight now about Catalonia, about Spain, and so on. And I don't believe in so much rules. I was active in the Club of Rome, also international in Vienna, and so I think we are missing a link. We are missing religion. We are missing, should it be part of it? And it is such a man's world, and I can assure you. Now, I'm very happy that in Holland we have a new government, and it is Christian also. So in the EPP party we should also redefine more with not the discussions all the time, but I think it should be experts, but it should be mixed also. And there is a law, I don't remember what it was, but you need 1/3 of the other gender, for the other the men and women, then you have a right discussion. But I don't remember exactly. And now I will go to South Africa because my son married a South African girl. I think you should more discuss culture. It is not only economic and social, but excuse me, the culture is very important, and the religion, and we have no idea. That is my question. Yeah, it is a remark, and it is for all the men here in the room, and the women also, and for our children and grandchildren. I'm an abuela now, and I hate it that we have a fight in our family because.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment. We will take it.
Rajoy should be a little bit more.
It's here. Panos, first here, please.
Hi, my question might be a bit more pedestrian. Jamie Michel with LVMH. I found really interesting the comments about the threats that the online world offers, but of course there are clearly opportunities. But we shouldn't forget that these opportunities are based on consumer trust. And I think at the moment, consumer trust is being undermined by many things, by cybersecurity, by threats to privacy, but by also a lack of confidence in what they're seeing online. And one of the main areas we're concerned with, of course, is the issue of counterfeit, which is a growing phenomenon, especially online, because you can't touch and feel the products you want to buy. And increasingly people are being fooled into buying counterfeits and threatening their health and safety. And so, given this as an ideas forum, one of the ideas that perhaps might be worth discussing is for intermediaries to have a responsibility not only to offer things to people, but to make sure that they know everything about it, including if, after the fact, something turns out to be fake, whether it's news or a product, that they tell the people that have already been exposed to it. That might get around this eternal problem of who should be liable, but actually it's about making everyone in the value chain responsible. So I was wondering what the panel might think of that.
Just there one.
Thank you, Risto Nieminen from European Parliamentary Research Service. I'm going back to the question of oil, because we are speaking about economic issues, but also opportunities and threats. So I think there is also a huge economic potential in this field, what we are discussing today. And therefore, a question, I'm just looking for the list of unicorns, and there are hardly any unicorns, European unicorns. It seems to be that before these companies grow big, they move to the States. And according to the list, 54% of unicorns are in the States and 2% in Europe. So why this is the situation?
And the last one here, please.
Žiga Turk from Slovenia. I have two questions. The first is Twitter more like Sky, editing its content, or more like AT&T, allowing everybody on AT&T's network to speak whatever they want? And the second question, by legislating the internet, do you want to give more censorship power to the government? Do you want to give censorship power to the big socials like Facebook, Twitter, Google, and so on? Or do you want to give power to the Davids, to the people who happen to be speaking on the internet? Thank you.
So, do you want to start?
Yes, I think that there was a question about the oil unicorns and opportunities. Coming back to the data protection, I think that we are at the moment world leader in that field. And I mean, completely looking at the different sides of it: data protection, regulation, network and information security directive, e-privacy regulation. What have we? We are the world leaders, and we have single rules in the future. This is very important, and this can be a competitive advantage, but I think that we need to start looking at the complete picture here, and more importantly, that we are not overdoing it, finding the right balance. Why is this important? And coming back to this, the question here, when we look at the past 20 years in the areas of digitalization and automation, we have digitalized our services, banks, and finally some of the public services as well. In the field of the automation, we have automated our manufacturing. But now, even bigger and faster, and the data-driven transition is starting, where in the digitalization, we shift to the digitalization of the manufacturing with Internet of Things, 3D printing, and so on. And on the automation side, we are moving to the automation of thinking and analyzing things with machine learning and artificial intelligence. And all of these are very much data-driven areas. And as I said previously, my great concern here is that Europe is lacking behind, and how can we catch the others? Let's cling on to our competitive advantage of having the set of rules in the whole single market placed, and let's look at how to get this the competitive advantage as unicorns and successful businesses in the next stage.
Okay, Dara, do you want to?
Yeah, just picking up on that and the question. I mean, it screams at us as Europeans when you look at all these top companies. You went through the list of top global companies. They're American. In fact, they're from two states in America, California and Seattle State. And I think there are two reasons. Firstly, access to capital. America is a much more highly evolved system for venture capital and supporting startups coming from, I suppose, the ecosystems they already have. The second reason, and we're only partially there with the GDPR, if you look at the suite of measures that the digital single market strategy, 16 different measures, is trying to put in place, it is to allow companies of access to, in the digital world, the market of 500 million people that we have. We have a single market for goods. We do not have a single market for digital products. Even in Germany, our biggest market, there are 16 different regulatory bodies functioning. So if we want to break, I suppose, the cycle of Europe, if we really want to arrive at a point where we do not accept that Europe is second place with respect to the digital economy, then we need to be ambitious with respect to the digital single market. I'm one of your customers, David. I have a Sky package at home, but when I bring my iPad over here to Brussels, then there's the geo-blocking. I cannot watch products that I have in my own country. There are different 27, 28 different sets of copyright laws. We have different rules around parcel and digital delivery. We have different VAT rules. And therefore, for any startup company, and when we look at Skype and Spotify, we have the intelligence in Europe, but we need to function like the single market we created for goods with respect to digital products. And we can do that if we support the Commission's ambitious digital single market strategy, and we don't keep reverting back to national fears and national arguments about certain sectors where all of a sudden it's, well, we'll be ambitious, but not in this area because this is dear to our heart.
Do you want to jump?
Yeah, no, I just could go further on what Dara has just said. I think there were two questions with a certain interlink about trust on platforms and how or what can be done best to find a fair way to make sure that platforms abide by the same rules as everyone. So first of all, I'm not sure that's a continuous argument that consumers feel a strong mistrust to digital service. I think they take all the profits out of it that are available, and later on some people complain that this is unfair. So we have not yet found a direct return of people's decision in that digital age. So far, it's still possible to get a cheap bag somewhere on the digital market and to complain afterwards that in France there is no production anymore possible because it's too expensive. And if we can't really close this circle for every citizen, for every company, for every country, it will be difficult to bring that to a good end. And therefore, I think, to your question, especially to the second one, how can we do we want to go for censorship? No, we don't want to go for censorship from my point of view, not at all. But we want to apply the rules in our cultures that have been successfully implemented in the last centuries, that these are applied also for the next century. And that means whatever is done in real terms or in digital terms has to be done with responsibility. And this responsibility can't be left to some people of Facebook or Twitter that then put out pictures that they don't like, although we both may like them. That cannot be left to governments because governments will never be neutral, and it cannot be left to somebody else except judges. They are the only ones that can, in the end, decide what is true, what is fair, and what is not fair on the basis of laws that we have done. But so far, we are not there, unfortunately, and we have to get there. And I think it will be very burdensome because we don't want to stop that speed of the digital markets, but to leave that speed just to the companies without any, let's say, correction unit would be very dangerous.
Okay. Yeah.
So can I make 2 points? Following up on what Dara was saying, by the way, you will be able to watch your Sky come March next year, I think, when portability comes in. Fantastic achievement, supported by the EPP, and thank you very much. We're looking forward to making that available. But actually, it goes to the point about European culture. We are different from the US. We have a richness of history and culture and difference that really gives us a competitive advantage as well as being really important to ourselves and our being. And I think the lady was making the point that we should be thinking about our culture as much as we are about technology. And from our point of view, as a big global business but investing very heavily in European culture, we see this place as a business opportunity because we think there is a real opportunity to invest in the history and the difference and the creativity in these markets that, frankly, doesn't exist elsewhere. And the US players, yes, they may be global, but they're very thin. They're very uniform. They're trying to appeal to hundreds of millions of people who have a sort of very common denominator sense of sensibilities. We have a richness here which we should celebrate. And whilst I totally appreciate the importance of a single market, we shouldn't, in creating a single market, undermine the differences that actually give us a competitive advantage that make us different from what happens on the West Coast. To the gentleman's question, is Twitter, AT&T and Sky? Look, the really important thing, and I think Andreas addressed it, regulation is not censorship, all right? Sky News and TG24 are two leading news stations which, frankly, upset the governments of the countries from which they broadcast frequently. Believe me, they get under their skin. They offer a platform for people to express views and debate that challenge governments, societies, business, but they're heavily regulated. They're regulated in a way that our society determines is appropriate for that kind of service. And I think all that we're saying is that it is not unreasonable to say that these new platforms, that they're not television and they're not telecoms companies, they are something different, should be subject to a degree of external regulatory frameworks that gives everybody, them included, some certainty about what their obligations are to society and to the rule of law. And it is, in the end, you're right, judges who should be making the decisions about whether the people are compliant with the law or not, and not politicians. Wholly concur with that.
So, just looking if there is any other question on the audience. There's two there. Mike, please. He's coming.
Good morning. My name is Nuno Oliveira from Vodafone. I see a lot of debate around the services, digital single market, but I haven't seen a specific reference to an essential facility for all this to happen, so which is infrastructure and connectivity. So I was wondering whether any of the panelists could raise some comments about the need of European member states in terms of connectivity and infrastructure.
And the second one?
Hi, it's somewhat related. Considering, internet providers like Sky collaborating with other internet providers, whether they can come up with a practical solution to actually monitor, the phenomenon of fake news and trolls. And we learned yesterday that IRI is developing a monitoring tool for the media to be able to research this phenomenon more. And my question is whether companies like Sky are doing something specific and whether they are looking to collaborate with platforms like Facebook and Twitter and governments and perhaps EU institutions to give a tangible solution to this.
David,
and soon. Thank you.
Do you want to answer immediately that?
Well, so we're not a social media company, so it's not our responsibility, or indeed it's not within our capability to monitor to the extent that you suggest. I mean, obviously on our television services, we're responsible for the content that goes on there, and we are responsible before it goes on rather than afterwards. So we absolutely comply with the laws in every of the markets we operate in. I think there are things, though, that we can do, for example, as an internet service provider, which we are in the UK and Ireland. So we're a network operator to help customers to manage access to the internet in their homes. So, for example, we in the UK have rolled out a market-leading set of filters, which allows customers to decide whether or not they want to have a family filter setting on in their homes, so that their kids are only exposed to the kind of content on the internet that is appropriate for the age of the kids in the home. So you can have a 13 rating, so anything that is deemed inappropriate for 13-year-olds and younger will get filtered. And we've rolled that out. It's people's choice, so they can turn it off. But it's those sorts of services that we have implemented that we believe are what people expect of us as a family brand, as a brand that's trusted to be in the home. And I think that's some of the heritage that we bring as a TV business to operating as an internet business. And I think that's, in a sense, sort of where I'm coming from in this whole debate, is that we have this heritage as a TV business. We know what people expect of us. And we do believe that ultimately this is something that needs to be considered for the whole of the internet ecosystem rather than the previously regulated parts.
There was a question about infrastructure, connectivity.
Oh, the Commission.
Juho?
Okay, this is really a good question, key question, because the connectivity and infrastructure is the prerequisite for the future services, the rollout of our future society, the new services, and for example, the connectivity, connected cars and our mobility systems. Interestingly, we found out when we abolished our roaming charges last summer, we prepared the proposals, and there was the wholesale proposal in the European Parliament. We had a lot of data from different countries, and for example, Germany and Finland, geographically exactly the same-sized countries. In Germany, more than 10 times more people. In which country do you think that should be the business case for the better investments in the mobile networks? It's clear that it would be Germany, but still the infrastructure is far more better in Finland. 98% of the country was covered by 4G, the networks last year in Finland, when in Germany it was roughly 60%. And how can that be? It's about the regulation, it's about the market structure, but they are very national bases at the moment. And of course there are a lot of vested interests, but we should really look into this, because this is a crucial point for Europe. Now we are lagging behind in 4G globally in Europe to Asia and United States, but now with 5G investments we can actually take a giant leap, huge leap, and if we have the right policies, right incentives in place, we can be the world leaders there again.
As it has been mentioned, I think the EPP, and I don't know what Dara thinks about that for the program for the party, I think we want to work in favor of high-speed internet becoming a basic right for European citizens. But I think we have to be careful not to promise that at a too early stage. I think if we promise it, we want to fix it and we want to make it happen directly. And I think there are still some steps that we have to overcome to get there. But the general view that I have from the European market, from Europe, with all the cultural traditions that we have, is that there should be a basic right for citizens to have high-speed internet access. The question will be how quickly can we achieve that, and therefore we have to be careful to promise it too early. But that we want to achieve that, I think there is no doubt.
Yeah, just very briefly, I mean, it has to be at the very top of our ambition. It has been something that's been led by EPP governments and indeed through the EPP in the European Parliament. But we have to remember why it's so important. I mean, this is about protecting the fabric of European life, particularly for those who live in rural and remote communities. And currently, for far too many who live in rural communities across our continent, they do not have the benefit of this new age we're living in. And it is not just to provide access to your social media accounts. It's important for your education, for access to health services, and other important services, and indeed to allow people to take part in these new working models. Many people now are working from home, but they can only work from home in many instances if they live with a very high level of connectivity. And as our populations are growing, the solution can't just be to suck everybody into our cities. But again here, I agree with you fully, Andreas, we must be highly ambitious but also realistic. As a national politician, one of the areas that we got most communication about in my constituency is the Irish government published a map showing the timescales of where would be getting connectivity in the immediate future and some in a year or two time. And of course, for the people who weren't in the immediate map, they didn't see the fact they'd be getting it in 2 years' time. They saw we're not getting it now. So, we have to be honest. We have to be ambitious, but we have to remember why we're doing it, and it's to protect something that's very, very important, and that is rural and remote communities right across the continent, including in Germany, which also has rural and remote communities, believe it or not.
Any further questions to the panel? Oh, here, this sir. Yes, the last one.
My name is Maxim. I'd like to ask such a question concerning fake news. How do you think, how could it really be effective to struggle fake news in case if they're supported by a certain government which spends a lot of gas and oil money on them? And
you can call it by the name.
Yeah, it's Russia and as any other countries. How do you think, what is the regulation just makes them make fake news not so clearly fake, but fake in their core still, so that they could be fake in their core, but not clearly fake, so you can see and say, oh, it's fake, and so on.
More transparency. Does anyone want to answer on that?
I mean, I think the question is not so difficult because wrong news have been there for centuries. So there is nothing new in this. The question is only who is liable. And so far we have medias, we have platforms where there is no liability. That's the only problem we have. And if there is a liability, there will be much more control. And that doesn't mean that there is no freedom of expression anymore. The people will try to express what they think, but they will try to have to respect also the rights of the others. And if there is not the right balance found, a judge will make a penalty, and it's done. The problem could arise from the numerous, let's say, places where media and news are aggregated. But I don't see a difference to an old newspaper and a new platform. Whenever there is something put on it, you have to respect the freedoms and the basic rights of the others. And if you do so, you can publish whatever you want. And if not, you have to be brought to court. And that is nothing new in the 21st century, from my point of view.
You?
Oh, thank you. I have to agree fully with Andreas here that this is not a new phenomenon. We always have to understand that if the tools and if we are digitalizing things, the same phenomenons are there than in the real and the old world as well. When looking at the discussion before the UK referendum, looking at the UK tabloids, what's new there? That perhaps those stories and news aren't always not that accurate, and then what's the liability of the old media there? It's the same question, and it all the time comes back to the media literacy of the consumers, and I think that in these times that the information is, every piece of information is out there, and then we have the flow of information, misinformation, disinformation. The credibility and good old style journalism will come to a new kind of value in the future.
There's a lot of work to do there on digital media literacy. Do you want to?
But just the concept of editorial responsibility is one that we all understand. It's enshrined in European law. Editorial control is in the AVMS directive, for example. It's a really well understood concept through history. And I would suggest that there is no reason why it cannot be a concept that doesn't get applied to some of these emerging platforms and technologies, albeit it'll have to be refined and updated, but nevertheless, it's a concept that I think we, as Europeans, ought to be able to make work.
So to wrap up this panel, because I guess we run out of time, it is clear that a new set of challenges were brought by tech companies and the internet. Perhaps the founding fathers of the internet didn't thought of the flip coin of the internet nowadays. Perhaps we should fix it somehow. So from bringing social media platforms to a more responsible behavior, to increase and export EU cybersecurity and data protection standards, the EU surely will figure out its own way to serve safe and secure the digital waves. Thank you so much for this discussion. Thank you for the panels and the audience. And I think there is coffee waiting for us.
Navegamos em silêncio. Navegamos em silêncio. Navegamos em silêncio.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear audience, welcome back. I hope you had a good but short coffee break. Now we're ready to start with our second panel debate, Ready, Set, Invest, the Juncker Plan and Beyond. We will be discussing why we need investments in Europe and where we are at today. But before we start this discussion here, we would like to go with you through the rules of the game and other useful information so that all of you can participate and also that you could make the most out of this event. So first thing first, we are live tweeting throughout this event. So please do be active, try to participate and use all our social media tools. Please, if you tweet your favorite question, tweet your favorite picture, but make sure that you use the hashtag EIF17. This year, we're also using for the first time a new tool. It's called Slido.com. So we kindly ask you to go to Slido.com, log in with the hashtag T250 and answer one of our questions. You can see that this question is relevant for this panel debate, and we would like to hear each one of you what you think, and then later on we'll bring the results to the speakers so they could also comment on them. We are also having this event live streamed throughout the day, so if you cannot stay with us the whole day, you have no excuse, you can still go to your work or home and watch us live, either on the Wilfred Martens Center website or on politico.eu. Last but not least, we have there Rafa Sanudo, our political cartoonist. You already saw earlier today some of his sketches. He's spicing up our conversations with some of his humor, and we're looking forward to see more of them. You will see them on the screen, or you will be able to see them on Twitter or Facebook and other social media channels. Right, now that the rules are clear, let's start with the Juncker Plan and Beyond. So, in 2014, we had a situation where the investments levels were very low in Europe. Then the Juncker Commission took office, and the Juncker Commission proposed the Juncker Plan. Fast forward, 2017, 3 years later, we have another situation where the investments that were amassed, or the financing that were mobilized through the Juncker Plan, has the potential to trigger more than 200 billion euros. So the Commission has managed, it seems, to make the Europeans invest again. But are these investments enough, or do we need more? So these are the questions that we could start with the discussion with our lovely speakers. And I would like to introduce who we have here today. So we have here Maria Spyraki, MEP, Committee on Regional Development. We also have here Maria Luís Albuquerque, former Minister of State and Finance of Portugal. Welcome. We also have here Paulina Dejmek-Hack, Financial Advisor to the President of the European Commission. And also Karim Lessina, Vice President of AT&T for International External Affairs. And I have here my lovely colleague, Juha-Pekka Nurvala, the EPP Acting Head of Unit for Policy and Strategy, who will be moderating this event. Just also a quick reminder, as I did before, to our speakers, please be short. If you see the totems that the light is flashing or you can hear the noise, then you know that you have to wrap up and pass on the word.
Thank you for the introductions, and also from my behalf, welcome to this year's Economic Ideas Forum, to everyone in present and to everyone who is watching this one online. The topic, Ready, Set, Invest, Juncker Plan and Beyond. What we will be doing is that we'll first focus on the Juncker Plan, have a discussion on its merits, and thereafter we will move to the second aspect, talking more on what we should take, what kind of steps we should take in the future, also in terms of companies' investments, and Karim will bring in the international aspect in terms of regulation. But without further ado, I hope that we will have a bit of a punchy exchange. When we go to the questions, I will ask the audience to be short and concise. Please do ask provocative questions if you have. That would be wonderful. And without further ado, let's get cracking. So we'll bring in Paulina first. You're the financial advisor to President Juncker. So from the Commission's point of view, has the Juncker Plan now lived up to the expectations? And are you happy or satisfied with the performance of the plan until now?
Thank you very much. And first of all, good morning to everyone. I'm very happy and honored to be with you this morning. Now, I think it's interesting. When we started out the work on the Juncker plan in 2014, 3 years ago, I think it's fair to say that there was quite a degree of skepticism. I think it was generally recognized that there is an investment gap in Europe following the crisis. But what many people said back then was that, well, there's ample liquidity now in the system, and what Europe has is a lack of project and not a lack of funding. And I think now, 3 years later, the fund has been operational for 2 years. We have reached more than 75% of the target level. 460,000 SMEs have already received or are in the process of getting support from thanks to the Juncker plan. 300,000 jobs created so far, according to the estimates of the European Investment Bank. So I think it's fair to say that we have come a very good way in light of what we wanted to achieve. Now, I think there are 3 points which are interesting. One is what we call the so-called additionality. It was important for us in the Commission that the investment plan, the Juncker plan, would support projects that would not have been financed anyway. And because the idea would not be to just move money from one pot of funding to another, but making sure that what was invested in was really new, innovative, and a bit riskier than was happening already. The second point is the investment committee. Important to us that projects should not be selected by politicians, but that we wanted to have a structure where we had real experts, market financing experts, project experts, and they are the ones who decide which projects get financing from the Juncker plan. The third point is to be, and I think that's interesting, we'll see that there's a lot of innovative financing coming in, and we see that when we look at the projects that have happened, everything from innovative cancer treatments to social integration to social infrastructure, the refurbishment of industrial sites and many other rather interesting projects. Now, if you already have a good thing, then why not do more of it? And that's the reason why we propose to extend and reinforce the Juncker plan. And we are very pleased that there is a political agreement between the co-legislators that will allow the Juncker plan to continue, and in that way ensuring, of course, also legal certainty and business continuity for investors that are looking to promote various projects. My very last comment, to preempt the various sounds and flashing lights. I think from the Commission point of view, it's never been our intention to say that the Juncker plan is the silver bullet or the magic wand that will deal with all Europe's investment problem. So we see this as part of a bigger agenda, part of our general pursuit of jobs, investment, growth conducive policies. A lot of things that have to happen at the national level, of course, in terms of structural reforms, where those are still needed, but also at the European level in terms of bringing the digital single market forward, the capital market union, energy union, and many other projects. But I will stop there.
Okay, thank you. Maria, until now, the EFSI has generated 240 billion of investments. In Greece, that means 19 transactions and 5 billion, about 2% of the total. Mm-hmm. As a Greek politician, are you happy with the situation? How would you like this situation to develop?
I would like to start with an example coming from the Greek mythology. Are you familiar with Janus? He has 2 faces. He has a very, very good and beautiful face, and something like bad but difficult face, starting with the good one. Well, the Juncker plan is working, FC is working, especially on a very high level, concerning companies, big companies coming from abroad, and I could give you 2 examples. The first one is Fraport. Fraport has a contract with Greece, and Fraport is starting to reconstruct our 14 local airports, so it's working. It's working on the level of Deutsche Telekom, because Deutsche Telekom is expanding the jobs in Greece, especially in the north. So it is important to say that, yes, it's working at a very high level. But now we have the bad face of Janus. It is the face concerning SMEs. The SMEs window, and I have some kind of data to give you, gives to the Juncker, according to the Juncker plan, approximately 62% of the total amount of money that it could be mobilizing. And it is a kind of 815 million. But the accessibility of this amount of money is quite difficult, especially for small and medium enterprises in Greece. The reasons are two. First is the problem of MPLs and LPs. It is not a banking sector problem only, it is a matter of political will. The government is not facilitating and encouraging the banking sector in order to tackle the MPLs problem. And secondly, of course, is the way that SMEs is behaving in Greece. So, my party, Nea Demokratia, is now putting on the table a new proposal. Mr. Mitsotakis will announce it tomorrow in our pro-convention meeting that we have in Heraklion. Well, we propose this. We have to face the problem case by case. We call the banking sector, and we have already negotiated with them, a case-by-case procedure with SMEs. And if they finally succeed the compromise in order to haircut the NPLs, then the government will be able to go on and cutting at the same percentage the taxes and the social contribution. It is important for giving a second life, a lifeline for SMEs. And it is important then to go on and access the SME window of Juncker plan. But overall, the numbers are in favor. Overall, we're doing good. We can do it better.
Okay, Maria Luís, you were minister during difficult times in Portugal, and you were instrumental in getting the country back on track. In Portugal, the FC has now 26 transactions and about the same 5.5 billion in investments. What's the Portuguese take on this? What's your take?
Good morning. Well, thank you very much for the invitation to be here. I remember very clearly how the discussion went when the Juncker plan was proposed and set, and all the instruments around it. And I remember very clearly discussing that it should address market failures and not deviate resources that would either way be applied. So I think that when we analyze the Juncker plan, its geographical distribution, we need to take into consideration a few things. We are all talking about SMEs, but the definition of SME is not quite the same in different countries. The size of the corporate sector, most of SMEs in Portugal, is really very, very small when compared to SMEs in Germany, for example. So just saying SMEs is too broad a concept. And in many cases, what we see is really the lack of platforms that would put some of these projects together so that they will have a size which will make them eligible and interesting to be financed. So the issue of market failure for SMEs also needs to take into account the pure size of the companies and the projects themselves. Also, the banking sector, as Maria said, is also very relevant. And I think that if we want the banking sector to be able to finance SMEs and that some of these market failures be resolved, we also need to complete the banking union, which is something that is, in my view, not as present as it should be. The project that began seems that given that many of the problems we saw have been, I wouldn't say resolved, but at least the height of the crisis is behind us, then people seem to forget the need to continue to do that to address market failures. Ideally, there would be no market failures, so there would be no need for a Juncker plan. But the fact is that the market failures remain. So we need to make sure first that the resources are not used to deviate or in projects that would in any way be carried forward and financed. And I fear that may be the case in many situations because given the difficulties to actually finance some of the other projects, we see that the political pressure to meet goals and to actually deliver on the Juncker plan may deviate what should have been the investment, and maybe those who need the most are not getting the bigger benefits. That being said, we do believe that there's a need of many investment also in more developed economies, namely in the infrastructures that need to be completed so that we can deepen the single market. If we don't do that, then market failures will continue to exist, and those peripheral countries, those in more difficult situations, will continue to suffer. So I would say if we are happy with the Juncker plan and the impact in Portugal, we would need more. But I think it's very, very narrow to look at it only from the Juncker plan perspective. We need to do a lot more. And if there are significant investors to deepen the single market, even if they happen elsewhere, we would also benefit from it, the smaller, more peripheral countries.
In terms of the market failures, you mentioned, for example, the small ones not having necessarily the same access to finance. Are those failures that should be tackled at the EU level, or are those now opportunities for banks or business people in Portugal to create those platforms to actually pool the money and get it to the right companies?
Both. Both, actually. There's always the national responsibility. We should not be waiting on the EU to do the things needed. So there's a clear national responsibility to push things forward, to make a better use of our own development bank, which was created during the government which I was part of. And clearly that is not being used as much as it should. So there is a national responsibility. But there is also the need to make sure that at the EU level, steps are being taken to complete all the things that we have started when we were in the middle of a terrible crisis. But then now that the most terrible part of the crisis is over for most people, we don't seem to feel that it's that important anymore. And I think that's a huge mistake. So all the projects which were started, and some of them were amazing projects, amazing ideas, and things that we managed to take forward, even if a lot of people were skeptic, like the Juncker plan, but I can give other examples. Super. I think that the push to complete those is not there yet, or not there anymore. And I think the EU has a significant role there, because if it's only the smaller countries, those who face more difficulties, who need to push forward, then it's not going to happen. We would need the support of those who feel maybe that the difficulty is not so big for them, but we do need, and that's in our common interest, all of us.
All right. Let me bring in Karim. You present, fair to say, a huge company, a huge investor throughout the globe, also in the EU. Juncker plan, from your company's perspective, is it a big factor in terms of making Europe an interesting place to invest, or what are you looking at?
Okay, thanks a lot, Juho. First of all, let me congratulate again Mikuláš, Tommy, and the team of the Martens Center, because they have been organizing this event every year, and I think every year the issues discussed are super interesting, and people are coming, so it proves that they are doing exactly the right thing. Having said that, I think, as you said, I'm working for a company that is quite a big company. Okay, we have been here for 140 years. We have a global scale. And just to give you a framework, I think between 2014 to now, we have been expanding our investments a lot globally, looking mostly at the Americas in a certain sense, with acquisition in Mexico and in the US and Latin America, but also looking globally with, I hope, the acquisition of Time Warner that we are still waiting to finalize right now. Why I'm telling this corporate story, it's because when we look at the Juncker plan, we look at it as external observers, okay? And to be honest, when I hear, I see it as a success, okay? We're talking about quite big amount of money invested. We are seeing really uptake in most of the countries. But to give you the framework, in the last 5 years, AT&T alone invested $140 billion just as a company. Okay, so we're talking about $22 billion every year. So just give you a little the frame about the numbers. And why I'm saying this is, when we look at it and we look at countries, we look at a lot of different options. And I think it's super important, and I think the Commission have done a great job, and the EIB and all the structure have done a great job in a difficult moment. But what we are looking is, from where we are now, where do we have to go? What are the main issues we have to look to continue to attract investments, to be sure that the continent continue to grow? I have two continents. I have Europe and Latin America. So for me, Europe growth is super important. Okay, it's super important for all the employees we have here, Slovakia, Czech Republic, UK, but it's super important in general because this is one of the machines of the global economy. So when we look at things, we often look at, I would say, 4 main priorities to relaunch that. Trade, huge. You know, we need to modernize trade agreements like the European Commission is doing, to be honest, and to continue to push and to open trade. The more the economy is open, the best it's going to work for attracting investment. Okay? We need to modernize markets. We need to modernize regulatory frameworks. We need to attract investment. We need to think at what is the main block today of why companies are not coming to invest or are not investing enough. We need to listen what the markets say. We need to listen what investors are saying. And I think this is the most important thing in front of us. You know, globally, wherever you are, governments are doing the same thing. At least pro-investment government, pro-competitive governments are trying to push competition and to see what is really going on. Let me use an example. What was that? On Saturday, President Macri in Argentina presented a new reform in order to get his fiscal system much more incentive, much more open. We are talking about a country that 2 years ago was almost the difficulty for anybody to invest. And in 2 years, he has been able to change the rationale and to attract those investments. So that's the second thing. The third thing, and then I will push, is let's look at what worked elsewhere. Obviously, we cannot copy and paste because every country is different. I'm coming from Italy, and Italy is totally different probably than Spain or Greece or Finland and etc. But let's try to see of potentially what worked and how we can modify it to adapt it to the local. But let's really concentrate on that. And I see everything exploding. So,
Paulina, now, especially with regard to what Karim was saying about regulation, openness, what are you like, you know, what is the Commission now planning in terms of this attractiveness point on making the EU even more attractive as a place for investment?
I would maybe, if I may, in addition to that, also react briefly to some of the other comments made. And I apologize because unfortunately I will have to leave you in a few minutes. I think I can agree with a lot of what has been said, starting with the momentum that I think we have now to be bold and bring the European project forward. We have all, if you look back, Europe is often able to do formidable things when we are in a crisis situation. I think it's about time that we actually take this reform forward also when actually the economy is picking up, unemployment is going down, and we are generally in a good place. We have a window of opportunity now to act. We have the wind in our sails, as President Juncker said in his speech in the European Parliament a couple of weeks ago. And that's a momentum we should use now for once, mend the roof while the sun is shining and not waiting for the next storm. In that context, I think the regulatory environment in general extremely important. I would certainly agree with banking union being completed, a big priority for the Commission. We put forward a communication a couple of weeks ago. We tried to also sketch a way forward for the remaining elements of a banking union. I would add to that capital markets union. I think extremely important. Deep and liquid, well-integrated capital markets is what we need in Europe, not to compete with bank financing, but having to have an alternative funding channel, also in terms of ensuring bigger shock absorption capacity. The issue of platforms. Oh, again, I agree very much. I think that's very important. We see that, for example, in the energy efficiency sector, where it's difficult for small players themselves to manage to get support from the Juncker plan. If we put together platforms, it works very well. Last point on SMEs. I think the issue with SMEs is also a matter of visibility sometimes, because when an SME gets support from the Juncker plan, they get it via their local bank intermediary. And we are working on the challenge we used to make sure that SMEs actually manage to get a bank loan are also aware that the reason that this cheap loan can happen is because there is the support of the European budget and the European Investment Bank behind. So I think they'd say it's a double challenge, one being certainly linked to visibility. Now, and then I'll stop on the general. What can the EU do to be more effective? I think we have been quite clear in terms of our openness to the world, our free and fair trade policy that we are putting in place. Indeed, we put mandate forward to start free trade negotiations with New Zealand and Australia, was working with Japan and others. I think a lot of it is also linked to the regulatory environment in general, which brings me back to the point about banking union, capital market union, also deepening further the economic and monetary union, extremely important. We work on that. Come forward with some ideas for that in December. So all in all, I think it's basically using the momentum that we actually have now, and of course doing that in a sense that we make our regulatory environment even more attractive and better than it is today. A lot of that can be done at the European level. A lot has to happen also at the national, regional, and local level. And with that, unfortunately, I will have to leave you. So sorry about that.
Thank you for taking the time to come and to debate with us on the Juncker plan. Then, in that case, we can move beyond the Juncker plan then, and now move on to maybe a bit more towards the venture capital and riskier investments part. Until now, the Juncker plan has mainly focused on debt instruments. And we have had a focus on SMEs getting funding through the local banks, getting the guarantees from the EFSI fund, and so on and so forth. The question for Maria, Greeks are well known to be very, very entrepreneurial people, but many of them decide to start those companies, for example, in London, where venture capital is more abundant.
Mm-hmm.
From your point of view, Capital Markets Union was mentioned. For Greece, what is the best way we could actually help the Greek youngsters who are now trying to establish their own companies to stay there and to get the necessary funding to grow their companies and create the jobs in Greece? What would your government, hopefully the new Prime Minister soon, Mitsotakis, what will Prime Minister Mitsotakis do?
First, I think that maybe we have to say something on the EU level. On the EU level, I think that with FC, we have to address the concerns of the people and the specific needs of the member states. And from Greece especially, we are lacking on the level of National Promotional Bank. The government has not yet nominated National Promotional Bank. And I would like now to give you an information that a year ago, when I tabled a question to Commissioner Moscovici, he told me that the lenders are in favor. The lenders are encouraging the current government to nominate National Promotional Bank. Until now, we have just press releases. So it is important to nominate, to set up a National Promotional Bank, and then to start working with investment platforms. Vice President Katainen has already insisted on this, and he has already encouraged the Greek authorities to go on, to proceed with specific investment in platforms concerning the tourism sector, for example, or the energy sector as well, or the startups. So it is important to use all the available financial tools, all the available tools that we have at the table. And it is important to explain to the young people that they have the opportunity and they have a second opportunity this way. This is the case for us. We will use everything, and I am quite sure that we have the know-how, we have the alliance, we have the pipelines that we can use everything that it is best practices in other member states, and we can proceed on this.
Maria Luís, my friend who was chairing the previous debate, Gonçalo, he's always telling me that his dream is to turn Portugal into the San Francisco of Europe. And as
we
part
have to bridge to match it.
That is the first point he always mentions. From your point of view, and then let's take Karim afterwards, in terms of regulatory aspects and the financing aspect, like, what do we now have to do? Like, now we have helped SMEs in terms of debt financing. How do we actually try to close the cap in terms of venture capital? Because, like, just for example, I had the latest numbers I found in 2014. In the US, 52 billion was invested through venture capital. In the EU, it was 11. In China, it was 16. So they have now surpassed us. How can we actually keep up in this game, or are we just meant to be now taken over by Alibaba and Amazon in all the fields?
Hopefully not, but there is, in my view, one explanation for that, which is difficult to address. We have demography against us. We are aging. Old countries, old continents are risk-averse, less innovative, and that is also part of the explanation, I think, why we hear, and we saw this also on the previous panel, why the biggest companies come from the US, why Greek entrepreneurs go to London, or why turning Lisbon into San Francisco is something that will probably not happen. I would not put it like that. I don't think that we should want to be San Francisco. We should take the best out of those examples and mix it with our own features, because I think it enriches us. It was also said here today that Europe's culture and diversity is an asset that we should take benefit of. But I think we should all reflect very carefully, also considering the challenges that we are facing today, how we can be more risk-prone, how we can indeed work on the capital markets union and reduce the importance of the banking sector in financing. How do we have more venture capital? And I think that it is a question more than anything of attitude. Attitude towards failure, for example. In Europe, typically, we think failure is something that is not seen as a useful learning opportunity, unlike what happens in the US. People make summits and they discuss failure experiences so that they can learn from that. Even when we do that in Europe, we only do it with people who have had success afterwards. So the failure itself is not something to be discussed and something socially not accepted. And that, I think, this question of culture, attitude, and a significant part of old age for many of us explains why we have these difficulties. And we cannot change demography that easily, though we have to take care of that very seriously. But I think we should discuss more. We should be more open to discussing failures, why some projects failed, what lessons can be taken from those, and have a different attitude. If we don't change our attitude, we will never have venture capital. And London seems to be the best place for venture capital, but unfortunately, London will no longer be part of the EU very soon. So I think we should really try and cover some of that gap. It is a question of attitude also from the authorities, the EU authorities and the local authorities. We should really invest more in risk activities, and also some consideration should be given to the banking sector regulation, because typically we over-regulate after a crisis. And I fear that we may be doing that now, and that won't help to finance riskier projects.
Let's bring in Karim, and after that, so I can give some time for the audience to prepare, let's open the floor for questions after Karim. So you have two continents. You're Italian, you work a lot in the States, but also in Southern America. Now we heard Maria Luis's points on entrepreneurship and how we can compete in the future as a continent. From your point of view, comparing us with the two other continents that are dear to you, what gives you, I hope or confidence even, that we will remain an important part of the global economy?
Look, let me really agree with what you said. You know, it's. I want to use you an example. I'm from a city in Italy called Bergamo, in the north of Italy. I am 42. I consider myself still young, okay, but maybe I'm getting a little older. When I'm in Italy, I'm super young. I'm too young, okay? When I go to the US, I'm pretty experienced. Maybe my gray hair would help for that. So that's a perspective issue. And probably in the Nordics, you will have less the problem that we have in the South. But that's an example. The second point is we have this myth of looking every time at San Francisco, Silicon Valley, and trying to repeat what worked elsewhere. And that's, for me, it's an error. You know, by the way, there is not only Silicon Valley. We have Texas, we have New York, we have Massachusetts. We have a lot of poles all around the US. So the reality is, let's try to develop or to focus on those sectors where Europe leads. There are a lot of sectors where Europe is leading. So let's not try every time to run after what is working in another place, but start looking at what is really working well in our part.
Are we being too pessimistic?
No, I'm not. Look, I'm not pessimistic. What I think is we should start.
As general,
yes, I think we compare too much, and sometimes we should not compare too much. We should try to focus and to try to push really on our leads. I think we have a huge examples of leadership at the European level, and that's for me will be important. But one thing is this. I think the overregulation question is really interesting. After a crisis, we all overregulate. It's normal. We want to control things better. We are out of the crisis. Numbers are getting better. Let's try to discuss of why, if I am a newcomer and I have my new startup, where I'm going to start my startup. If I'm Greek and I'm starting it in London, okay, maybe with Brexit it's an issue now, but we should watch it at your European level, right? Because if I am from Oklahoma and I decide to start my startup in Silicon Valley and New York, nobody's going to be shocked about that. Okay, so the reality is that let's try also to look a little more at the European level. I have investment in Slovak, in Czech, in the UK. I'm present in 27 member states as a company. So the reality is that we try to move people. But if you try to move somebody from, I don't know, Rome to, and it's a good example because we don't have employees there, from Rome to Slovak Republic, people will start telling you, why should I go to Slovak? And I want to stay in my home place. So we have particularities that maybe others don't have. Last point on your comparison. I think comparing is interesting, and we need to remember that all the time, because some governments, like in Mexico, have been able to do some huge reforms in a few years and attract a lot of investments. Some other governments coming, like Argentina that I was doing before, is trying to change the path. But also the European level, we are trying to do things. I think this Commission is trying to move the agenda, is trying to simplify regulation. We need to continue. The reality is that we need to think that this is a constant process. Because we cannot imagine we arrive and we change things in 1 second and then it's good for the next 10 years. I'm coming from a sector where technology changes almost every 18 months. So the reality is that if you want your system to be adaptable, you need to constantly adapt, to focus more on some principles and not try to over-regulate or look at it. Think to it, and then I stop because I see everything blinking. Think to it. The telecom sector is a huge sector, and it's not a huge sector only because it's my sector and pays my salary. It's a huge sector because whatever investment is made in a network, create an ecosystem around, giving the possibility for phones, networks, SMEs to be connected to the world. And we should look at those kind of maximizer of investment and try to understand why the investments are not going at the same level, for example, than in other places. And take the decision on it and decide, okay, we need to take a risk and we need to promote investment there. It doesn't mean taking taxpayer money and put it there. It is trying to simplify the system and being sure to promote those investments, because this is going to launch it. One number and they close. In AT&T supply chain, we have 60,000 SMEs. Okay, so every dollar that we spend is going to be beneficial not only to the consumer but also to the SME supply chain. And we're not an exception. This is happening all over the sectors. And this is something we really have to look with a lot of attention.
So openness and regulation.
Yes. Simplifying or modernizing. It's not no regulation. Don't misunderstand it. Okay? It's really modernizing it and adapting to the future, like we do in the rest of the sectors.
Accepting change.
That's a good one.
First question from the audience. Let's take the gentleman here. If I may ask, kind favor or provocative question would be?
My name is Antoine Pop. I'm an economist from Leuven University. And very long ago, I was strategic advisor to Albert Copé of the High Authority of the Coal and Steel Community, where I made a study about the steel industry, advised the European steel industry to change its structure in production. Unfortunately, it was not followed. So you see our steel industry is now in the hands of the Indians. Anyway, most recently, I advised Mr. Van Rompuy, a friend of mine since the 60s, because I was replacing his father as professor in Leuven. I advised him when he became president, why don't you set up a grand plan for Europe? I said it in French to please our Walloons and the French. A grand plan with the 20 most intelligent people of the world for Europe. Now they agree that they should have done it, because then the Brexit wouldn't have taken place. But anyway, it's never too late to do good. Third point, I would advise, pity that the lady of Mr. Juncker is not here anymore, that these three people go and join his cabinet, because I think their advice about small and medium-sized companies is very pertinent. First of all, I have always worked in small and medium-sized companies, build them up. I built factories as far as South Korea. Hope they will not destroy it in the future. Anyway, I think the small and medium companies are really the growth pool of our economy, have been and will be. In Belgium, 80% of all new employment and all patent applications come from the small and medium-sized companies. I am talking not in European terms, because that's a very wrong interpretation. A small company is a company up to 50 people. It's not a company of 200 or 300 people. Concerning the small and medium-sized companies, you must consider, and European authorities should consider, and everybody should consider, that we in our small and medium-sized companies, we don't have 10 people to apply for subsidies or financing. You see, we can pay one person. That's why most of European money goes where it doesn't have to go. That's my first point. The second point is that the banks... Okay, that's my end. The second point, and most important point, is also, why do we need the banks? Are the banks really the growth pool of our economy? Come on. What Europe should do is put all the money in an investment company. Put intelligent people who agree and invest in small companies, and it will grow like the fund in Norway. It will become $1 billion company. The banks throw them out of the whole circle. We don't need them. Europe has intelligent people enough to judge where money should be invested. The banks don't have that intelligence. There is only one bank in Belgium now who knows what blockchain is. So come on.
Thank you for the 2 points. Let's take the lady over there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Kaisu Karvala. I represent FIPRA for digital side. I've been Karim's colleague in telco industry nearly 15 years. Then I jumped into Angry Birds, which is an application in mobile devices. So I dare to challenge you and say that we actually do have Silicon Valley. It's in Nordic countries. You have the gaming hubs. And how did that happen was that Nokia's long tail, like AT&T has 60,000 SMEs, it got broken. So you had to become innovative because of the circumstances. You were out of job. You didn't do SIM cards anymore for Nokia because everybody was in touchscreens. So what Rovio did was like, okay, let's make a mobile game because of the touchscreen. So being bold, innovative, doing stuff that nobody believed in was possible because the government let them go. There was no regulation. There were actually no funds either from the government. The guys just invented an SME sort of startup hub like you have in Lisbon. We have a lot of partners in Lisbon, so you might be already actually some sort of sexier part of the Bay Area than you even know. At least we did a lot of things together with the Portuguese. So I think one of the things is really that do not over-regulate things that you don't know where the trends are heading. We didn't know when we started. Angry Birds was the 53rd game, and nobody actually gave any subsidies for doing that. The instruments suck. SMEs need money now. They can't wait 18 months if they have a greenfield operation. They can't hire me here in Brussels to lobby them and find the money. It's far too difficult to find. So those are the things you should tackle because there is money in Europe and there is know-how in Europe. We should have an instrument for those guys who actually innovate that they stay here because they can actually get on hold of that money. It can't be so very difficult to apply for that fund that not even like the beautiful brains of the application industry don't know how to apply the money for. So I mean that, and the third point being, you were talking about us being too old. I think it's a mental thing. It's everyday learning. I think the digitalization starts by us wanting to move on forward all the time, every day learning something new. Like I try to use this stupid notebook and I don't have a clue how I convert it in Word, but it looks good and I will learn someday. And I'm already 47, so I mean. But really, make it easier, make it a little bit faster, do regulate where there are bottlenecks, but believe that we have those success stories already and we have Silicon Valley up there in Nordic countries, so welcome.
Before the next question, let's take Marianne and Maria Luís on this. Make it easier.
Yes.
Is it a role for just let the businesses do?
Yes.
Should we now really just,
It is quite important
step back
to stay on two words. First is simplification. And I strongly support simplification at all levels. I'm one of the members of the parliament that I vote for one book, one rule book for all funding. And I'm quite sure that if we go on with one rule book for all funding, for all kind of fundings, then we can finally facilitate SMEs to have access to additionality funding. I mean, funding coming from FC, from multi-annual financial framework, and from the private sector. It is the first one. The second, of course, is how can we avoid over-regulation. Enough is enough. We can give member states, and sometimes we have to give the SMEs the way to go on to proceed without regulating every single step. This is the case for me, and of course, I think that we can use EU funding and the national funding and private funding in order to encourage lifelong learning issues, lifelong learning skills after 50. We have to focus on women after 50. We have to focus on unemployment after 50. It is important to familiarize them with the new technologies, with the digital agenda, and help them to find a new job.
And Maria Luís, is a job for the private sector or the public sector? That's the question. Where should the money come from? Especially in terms of, like, as was asked, that it would be quick, easy. As the gentleman pointed out, they cannot afford that many people to fill in applications.
Ideally, it should come from the private sector, I would say. I mean, the public sector should only come in for market failures. And we should make sure that the regulation, the laws we put in place, address those market failures and actually reduce them if at all possible, when possible. But the question of having the SMEs, the difficulty for them to access the financing, you're absolutely right. A 10-people company does not have one single person that's either has the knowledge and the time to actually take care of all the bureaucracy. But at the same time, we also want to make sure that the money is properly used. We want to make sure there are control mechanisms in place. We want to make sure that projects supported, especially coming from the public sector and meaning risks for the taxpayers across Europe, that there is enough control. So I don't think it is an easy balance to strike between having the controls, having the necessary oversight, and reducing the bureaucracy. Hence the platforms that I was mentioning that can do this sort of intermediate point where SMEs can have their lives made easier, but the necessary control and scrutiny can also be done, because we do not want to throw money to the companies to see after some time that it has been wasted and this has happened in my countries back in the 80s when we started to receive the first funds, that a lot of the money which was destined for the corporate sector to actually evolve has been used in buying better cars for their owners. That's not what we want. So we need to find the proper balance.
Yeah.
But
would it then be sensible to not go through the public sector and all, just like, give tax incentives for investors that they do all of this, because if they lose their money, it's on them. Then we don't have to answer the taxpayer.
Unfortunately, as we have discovered in this most recent crisis, it's not necessarily their problem, because if it affects the banks, it becomes our problem. So I wouldn't put it as light in such a light way as that. What I would say is that the private sector should be the driver, because if you put your money, if you got skin in the game, you will definitely try to make the right choices. And what happens way too often is that with taxpayers' money, you don't feel like you have skin in the game. And that makes poorer choices by definition. So the appropriate mix is not easy to find. For market failures, you cannot necessarily resort to private investors, because tax incentives are not enough to address market failures. But also the definition itself of market failures is also something disputable, because what is a market failure? Indeed, is it something that should be done, or maybe not at all? And just one final note, I see the light flashing, on a concern that I hear way too often in Europe as how we lost some traditional industries. globalization is something incredibly beneficial for the world. Hundreds of millions of people have left extreme poverty because of globalization. If our steel industry goes to India, that should not be a problem, as long as we have better jobs in Europe doing something else. So what we need to find is, how do we stay on top of the game in Europe, doing different things from what we did before? Maybe industry is not our thing anymore. That's fine. Globalized world will make sure that we get the goods that we need, but we need to make sure that we can indeed continue to employ people after 50, and I should worry because I'm already there.
Yes, that's why I told it.
I think I found one of my new person I want to follow, because I was going to say exactly the same. FDI. So we're talking about money. We're talking about investment. Do we want to put a color to investment? Do we want to put a nationality to investment? There are security issues that we can put, but we have to be very careful. If a company decides to come to invest in Europe and to buy a local champion or national champions, we have to be very careful in putting some limits and etc., because it's a message that we send to the global market. So for me, if we want to be open, and that's one part of the open, if we want to grow, we need to attract those investments. At the contrary, we need to see how we convince Indians, Koreans, Tunisians, Argentinians to come to invest in our continent. This is exactly what we need to do, for two reasons. Protecting your national champions logically costs you a lot of money, because you create inequalities on the market, you disincentivize investments for other players, and you support a national champion that logically have a tendency to become less competitive. So your taxpayer money go to create a market imbalance. And the same money that you could use to, for example, do incubators or promote startups and etc., that money will not get there. So let's try to look at this in a different way. And I'm not, just as a point, what I was talking about not copying Silicon Valley is because we every time have this myth of how can I create the new Google, or the European Facebook. There's a fantastic story in Italy. We decided to create the Catania Valley. I don't know if you guys have been to Catania. It's a fantastic place, okay? And I really love Catania. But it's not exactly the place where you are going to get incubators of universities and companies and venture capital to be there, unfortunately. But that's the example. We want to create all those little valleys. New York can be an example. Mayor Bloomberg just launched an incredible project he worked on for 7 years, and they have done an incredible amount of mix of universities, incubator and venture capitals in a part of New York that was abandoned, and they're trying to launch it as a new, let's say, incubator of creation. We can do things, but it needs to be a kind of European project where we work all together. But we have to remember, the most important thing is attract foreign investment, attract private investment, because capital is global. I think I've said that even last year. Capital is global. It goes where the best return is. That's all. And capital is not only big multinationals. We are a 100% listed company. The reality is that is your pension fund, is our retirement money. All this is the capital that will go where the best return is. So let's create the conditions for that, and let's not be totally have the fear of we need to protect my little player because it gives my little job to my neighbor, but think that the best thing will happen to the neighbor if we grow. There are so many challenges in front of us that are coming with automation, artificial intelligence, and etc., that if we start thinking that we have to create boundaries and protect, we are going to lose that evolution, and that's the biggest risk for all of us.
So let's not redo Google, let's build on Google.
Yes.
Let's bring Ekaterina.
I would like to bring a question that we received through the Slido.com, and I think we're going to see now the results. People have voted on Slido.com. You can see maybe the speakers can quickly comment afterwards. And we have a question from one of our followers, and I would like to ask the speakers who would like to answer it. So should we focus investments in areas where we are strong already, like the automotive, advanced manufacturing, or fintech, or invest in areas where we are lagging behind? So if you would like to comment on it, and also maybe on the results. And I just want also the people that haven't voted on Slido.com, please do take the chance, go on Slido.com and participate. It'd be great. Thank you.
I don't think that we have to have a solution for all of us. It depends on the region, it depends on the member state. and allow me to choose between these two options, I prefer energy. I come from Greece. I strongly believe that we can become a kind of energy hub in my country, and I think that the Juncker plan can facilitate us to go on with infrastructure like pipelines or LNG storage, etc.
I was just looking, and I saw that there were no votes for investment in agriculture, which surprises me. First, because for all this to actually work, we all need to eat. So let's not lose focus of that part of traditional production, which is key. And it will actually become even more relevant in the future for all sorts of reasons. So I think that agriculture is a sector where innovation is absolutely amazing in recent years. So looking at agriculture only as a traditional sector and ignoring how much it is of a tech sector these days, I think it's a mistake or maybe misinformation. That being said, the energy, I guess that for similar reasons to Greece, peripheral countries suffer from competitiveness issues because of the cost of energy. And we have managed, due to the crisis, to and when I say we, in this case, it's Portugal and Spain, to overcome France's resistance to actually have a link, an energy link between the Iberian Peninsula and the rest of Europe. Also because the issue of energy supply security became more relevant in recent years for the rest of Europe. So energy is absolutely key to everything else, to agriculture included. And I would say that is a priority. That is one part of the single market which badly needs to be completed. But that being said, I think that when we have this kind of thing like technology, energy, agriculture, I don't see technology as a sector itself. Technology is for the service of all activities. So technology in itself, without further definition, is a concept that I think falls a lot short of what should be. So.
Let's take the one last question from the audience, from the gentleman here. Could I ask for a concise and a short question, please?
Very concise, very provocative. I heard
fantastic.
I heard overregulation, I heard modernizing, I heard simplifying, but I didn't hear transparency and ethical monitoring, because we just have a new scandal, the Paradise Papers, we had the Panama Papers. The speed with which money is circulating in the world is staggering, is almost uncontrollable. So with all the offshore companies, etc., etc. So investment should be ethical, shouldn't it?
Who wants to go first?
If you want, I can start it. I think my company has no problem on that side. I think we have to look at something, and I'm speaking on a personal basis in this case, okay? Because it happened 2 days ago. But the reality is, we need to create the framework. There is this work on the OECD level for the past 5 or 6 years to try to find a proper approach to fiscal, and I think that's the most important thing. It's to create the framework. Transparency is probably one of the most important things in front of us. I think the US have done some huge evolutions in the last years. We have a very, very strict code called the FCPA that creates really a model, in my opinion, at the international level on how corporations should behave. So the reality is that let's focus really on transparency. Let's focus really on being able to develop these OECD rules that at least will apply to the OECD countries. For me, this is the most important thing. Companies should be the basis for an ethical approach. I work for a company where ethics is the priority number one. Just to give you an example, we have a chief compliance officer that is the controller, let's say, for a company that reports directly to the board. So that gives you the importance of our chief compliance officer. And the basis of our company is complying all over the world with the regulation and being sure that we adapt the highest standards of ethics ever. If we don't do it, there is a huge issue. And I'm proud to work for a company like this. But that's our company. Then what the others do, I cannot talk about.
Maria, competition issues on this one? fairness.
Transparency is a core issue, of course, but I would like to stay on the ground and say a few words. How can our countries, our member states, could be attractive to the investors? First of all, I think that it is the legal certainty. It is the first point for me. And we face a lot of problems in Greece, that's why I put it on the table. Second is the lower taxes. If we have lower taxes, then nobody will start searching about taxes, paradise, etc. And third, of course, we have to remove uncertainty from all levels in our countries, in our EU system.
Ethicals obviously is key, but it's up to all of us to make sure that companies apply those standards. And if we discriminate companies who are not ethical, then we are giving each single individual a big contribution for that. That being said, tax competition is an important part of global competition. And it is accepted that countries in more hardship should lower their taxes to attract more investment. Unfortunately, it's not the case in my country, where the current government thinks that taxes for corporates should not be lowered. And I think it's a huge mistake that we will pay very highly in the future. But tax competition is a reality. So instead of just making these scandals known and discussed in the social networks, we should indeed think, can we lower taxes? What choices do we have to make in order for taxes to be lowered? Because sometimes this discussion feels a little futile. There will be tax competition. Despite all the scandals, there will be tax competition. We should think, what can we do to lower our own taxes, not only on the corporate sector, but also on labor? That is also hurting us very much. But then we will have to make the very difficult choices on where the taxpayers' money goes to. And that's what politicians, I think, are less willing to face.
I would love to get into a discussion on tax right now, but I'm afraid that we have to wrap up the discussion. I think it's a fair thing to summarize what has been said in terms of making Europe an attractive place. We need to be open for change and for trade. We need to be flexible, and we need to be very smart in how we actually involve the public sector in the business of developments and new companies. But with these words, thank you for the speakers, thank you for your time, thank you for the audience for all your questions, especially for the provocative questions. Love it, and I hope that you have a wonderful Economic Ideas Forum.
Thank you very much to everyone. We will see each other in 15 minutes. There was a short coffee break, so please take your short coffee breaks, and we'll see each other in 15 minutes. Welcome back, dear audience, and welcome, dear speakers. Today we're gonna talk about new work, new welfare in our third panel debate. But before we start, let's go again through the rules of the game so that we make sure that you interact with us and also we get a lot of feedback from you. So first thing, we are tweeting, we're live tweeting, and I am told by our social media team that the hashtag EIF17 is trending on Twitter, so do interact with us, send us your questions, pictures, quote the speakers, and talk to us on Twitter. Next, we are using a lot now Slido.com, so we do encourage you, go on Slido.com. You can log in with hashtag T250. You'll have a question relevant for this panel, so do participate. We will bring up the results later to our speakers to comment. We are also live streaming this event. It's on the website of the Martens Center and also on all our social media channels and also on politico.eu. So if you have to leave early, you know where to find us. Last but not least, we have Rafa Sanudo. He's our political cartoonist. He's been entertaining us in the first half of the day with his cartoons. You will see them later, and stay tuned for what's coming next. Now let's go back to the topic of our third panel. We would like to talk today with you and our speakers about how technology is affecting our work. We are experiencing today the fourth industrial revolution. I'm a little bit not being on time. So we're experiencing today the fourth industrial revolution, where our digital world is merging with the real world. New technologies are changing not only our work, but also how we think and how we behave. We see a future where robots will replace humans in routine jobs, and we also see a future where flexible schedules will be something part of the normal. So a lot of unconventional changes. But are we really ready for that? So we have 4 speakers today with us, and I would like to introduce them to you. We have here today Petteri Orpo, MP, Minister of Finance of Finland, and leader of the National Coalition Party. Welcome. We also have here Gunnar Hökmark, hey, MEP, Committee on Economic and Monetary Affairs. Welcome. We also have here with us Žiga Turk, professor at the University of Ljubljana and former Minister of Education and Science of Slovenia. And last but not least, Federico Ottavio Reo, Research Officer at the Martens Center. The panel debate will be moderated by Roland Freudenstein, Policy Director at the Martens Center.
It's a special challenge. This is already the third session in a row, and we are well aware that we are between you and your well-deserved lunch. So I thought, what could I start this session with? A quote. It's going to be a John Maynard Keynes quote, out of all things. The point of an economy is to distribute wealth and time so as to improve the lot of everyone. Now, of course, as I learned from my center-right youth organizations back in the 1970s, the immediate question is who defines what is the best lot of everyone. But this and other questions is what we're going to discuss here. I would like to start with Žiga Turk and ask him about this assumption that automation will lead to a radical increase, or maybe gradual, but in the end, a very substantial increase of leisure, to the point where work, as we know it, actually disappears. Okay. Some people would call it the Luddite fallacy. You know the Luddite movement? In German, they have a much more beautiful name, Maschinenstürmer. That sounds really martial.
Excellent.
And anyway, so the Luddites were the people who destroyed machines that they thought were taking away their jobs back in the 19th century. And fallacy, already, you can guess it, is the assumption that, of course, this was completely wrong because as some jobs disappeared, new jobs were created. So, Žiga, what do we make of this assumption that now we're in in an era in which work slowly disappears before our very eyes? And what are the consequences?
Thank you for this introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. You actually framed the discussion. But actually, it's very important how we frame this discussion. And the short answer to your question would be, yes, jobs are destroyed, but there is still and will still be plenty of work to be done. And to be even more precise about framing this discussion, I mean, jobs have been destroyed throughout history. Technological progress happened throughout history. It always appears that what you are observing from nearby appears bigger. So the change that we are living through appears bigger than the change our fathers and our grandfathers were living through. So I would propose to ask ourselves in this session actually how to frame this end-of-work problem. And what you suggested, in a sense, Roland, was that we frame it as a problem of abundance. So we will have this artificial intelligence, we will have robots, we will have automation that will create an abundance of everything. We will not have to work anymore. The other way of framing it is saying, no, it's not an issue of abundance. It is still, it continues to be an issue of scarcity. There still will be things that we will have to do. There still will be things that we need to do. And somehow this goes down to values. We have been living as hunter-gatherers a history of hundreds of thousands of years of scarcity. So our value system is a value system of scarcity. We have proverbs, quotes like in the Bible, I mean, no work, no eat. Or Anne Frank says, laziness may be attractive, but work gives you satisfaction. And you guys in this room, you could ask yourselves, I mean, don't you feel good when you come home from a well-done work in the evening, when you can say, wow, today I really did something well. I really did something good. It feels great. And this is something which is very deeply in us. And as opposed to that, you have people like Keynes, you have people like Rifkin, you have people like Marx, who would say that, well, work is some invented reality from the 18th century. Work is something that determines property. So you work on something, you get property out of that. You're better at work, you're more valued at society. So you have this idea of work which is shaping society in a way which they do not like. So if you take work away, you can take property away, and you can take any kind of social relations or hierarchies away. And this is what we are dealing with. And actually, Keynes said that we could work 4 hours per week in the 1930s. So my proposal would be to continue to be ambitious, to continue to look the world as a world of scarcity. There is still a lot to be done. We have poorly developed regions in the West and in the East of Europe. We have people in Europe who do not have abundance of everything. We need to tackle climate change, which requires work. It has to be done. Somebody has to perform it. It will not always be robots. And when robots will be performing something, you could still find work if you feel like finding work. If laziness is more attractive, then you can lie around. We could develop Africa. We could go to Mars. We could tend our gardens better. There is plenty of things to be done, even with that. This is scarcity. Scarcity requires work. And as you said in the beginning, if you frame it as a problem of abundance, abundance requires distribution. And distribution is something that some politicians, some of our colleagues, very much like to do, or would create elaborate schemes on how to distribute and how to redistribute. But my suggestion, at least for this political family, would be frame it as an issue of scarcity. There are still things to be done. There are still things to be ambitious about. There are still desires to be had. So, yes, jobs will be destroyed. Robots will work. But those who want to work will not run out of work.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Let me now turn to Minister Petteri Orpo. Finland is known to have a particularly innovative approach to these things. And I'd like to focus on two vectors, two particular areas here. One is education. What is the role played the role of education in this question? And we all know that Finland is now very high in the PISA international comparison of performance of education systems. Wasn't always the case, I gather. And the second aspect I would like to ask you about is there seems to be an experiment going on with a universal basic income. And this is a term that absolutely is part and parcel of this debate about the future of work, is wouldn't it make sense to pay everyone a basic income regardless of whether they work or not, and then they, on top of that, they can actually earn more money. So Finland is doing a kind of field test of that principle. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And at first, I would like to thank the possibility to take part in this discussion. And it's great to be here with our political family. I just arrived from ECOFIN meeting, and I think that the whole Europe, the whole EU we are starting something new. Because of Brexit, we have started to reform our own European Union, and it's very good. It's a very good thing, because we all know that the European is not ready. We have to do reforms, and I'm very happy that our program is not the Brexit, but it's reforming the EU. And I have seen that EU27 is very united at this moment, and so we have to continue the work. But education, new welfare, new work, and very inspiring topics. And for your question, yes, Finland is celebrating its 100 years anniversary in this year. 100 years ago, Finland was the poor country in far off north. We still are in the far off north, but we are not the poor country anymore. The answer how we have done this is that we have invested for education in all our history, and we are doing that again because the working life is changing. We have digitalization, automatization, we have global markets, we have global competitiveness, and we know that we have to reform our education system to give people ability to do with new world, and we know that they need new skills, and that's why we have started to reform the whole education system from the beginning from the childhood education to the universities. And I'm very proud that these reforms are led by our own minister, Kokoomusminister Sanni Grahn-Laasonen. She is doing a great job in Finland, and we really we try and we have to support her, because education is key for the future welfare in Finland and also in all over the Europe. For your other question about the social security reform, because for the same reason, the working life is changing. Jobs are untypical, less paid. We have recognized that we have to reform also whole our social security system. And we have started the pilot for basic income model. We selected 2,000 randomly chosen unemployed people to this pilot. We don't have very much experience because we started at the beginning of this year, and we are going to continue this pilot for 2 years, and we are collecting experiences. But I'm quite sure that something like basic income model we need in modern society. There has been a lot of interests from all over the world to our the pilot, and I can promise that when we could have first results, we will tell the results for you, because I think that we all have the same problems. We have to reform our social security system. We in this pilot we give 560 euros per month to the people, unemployed people, and the system works that if they could have a job, if they could earn something, they don't lose the money. Less bureaucracy, working is worthwhile. It would be always be worth to do the work.
Thanks very much. Let me now turn to Federico and ask you, would a universal basic income really make sense? I mean, we've heard a couple of advantages. It would reduce bureaucracy because you don't have to calculate the welfare for every single unemployed. It would allegedly not take away the incentive to engage oneself in, for example, humanitarian work. That's one of the standard claims of the proponents of universal basic income, is that, you have to distinguish between work and paid work, and you can still work even if you don't receive direct pay for it. So what is the future of UBI, as it's called?
Well, thanks a lot, Roland. I think we cannot probably say anything conclusive on the matter, because the experiments that have been tried, and this is not the only one, there have been a series of experiments since the 1970s, in fact, have all been relatively small. So one of the main problems is, whatever is the result of the Finnish experiment, how are you going to extrapolate and generalize that result to the application of basic income to entire societies? That is a big logical jump. Let's start from definition. What is a universal basic income? You defined it, but it's good to distinguish it from other concepts that are often confused with it. It's a sum of money that is granted by the state to every citizen, regardless. It's unconditional. So it doesn't depend on any specific features of the citizen. It doesn't depend on the level of income. It doesn't depend on the educational achievement. It is not a minimum wage, which is the legally mandated minimum pay for work. It is not basic income for the poor, which is only limited to the poorest part of the population. It's a universal measure. What are the arguments that are usually put forward for it? One of it is the point Giga was making. We are moving to a society of abundance from a society of scarcity. If people will not work anymore, our social security systems, which are largely structured around contributions from workers and employers, will be outmoded. So we will need something different, robotization and the end of work. And I'm afraid that the objection to this argument was already put forward by Giga. It's largely overblown. All industrial revolutions, not only the fourth, the first, the second, and the third, produced technology-led disruptions and massive dislocations, social and economic dislocations, which in many ways were even superior to the one we are going through. New jobs appeared, new needs and wants by consumers were created, new professions emerged. So I'm afraid that argument is a little bit overblown. Second argument is the profits. Who will the profits accrue to? And here it goes, the argument goes, since mostly robots will work, profits will mostly accrue to the owners of robots. So we need to redistribute these profits. And even if that were true, it is not, I'm afraid, behind this there is what I call the Piketty fallacy. because Piketty keeps repeating that sort of reasoning in its book. And it's the idea that people will just stockpile, capital, and this capital will never re-enter the productive process and create jobs and opportunities somewhere else. Third argument is poverty and inequality. It's deemed to be a way to targeted reduction of poverty and inequality. And here, I guess the best reaction is to say, we can do much more effectively with far less money, because if we target measures to the really needy instead of implementing a universal basic income that gives the same money to Bill Gates and to the poorest person in the country. The final argument, which I think is the most interesting, and it has been especially put forward by more conservative economists. I'm thinking about Milton Friedman, who in the 1970s famously proposed a basic income in the form of a negative income tax, is the argument of simplification. It's not just simplification in the way you administer welfare structures, which is what Petteri was hinting at. It's the possibility of replacing, to some extent, currently existing welfare programs, which are complicated and are scattered throughout many agencies, with a single welfare measure that will be administered universally for everyone. That seems to be the most plausible defense of the universal basic income, but there are problems. And so I see that this is flashing, so let me quickly go through the problems. I think there are three major issues. The first is the issue of cost. We do not know how much it will cost, but from the calculations that we have made, for example, in the case of Finland, I think it will cost a little bit less than the current welfare system. So only if it is a replacement to the whole welfare system, it will be viable for savings. In the United States, similar calculations have shown that it will be actually much more expensive than the current systems. In Central and Eastern Europe, it's unthinkable because the public budgets could not sustain it. So cost is the first problem. Second problem is work ethics. Simply, there are two angles here. Center-left people tend to say it's unfair because you are giving the same money to the very rich and the very poor. There are center-left critiques of the basic income, not only center-right. Center-right people have always tended to strengthen or to emphasize freedom and responsibility. So they tend to say you are decoupling reward for work from efforts, from engagement. And then there is a third problem of incentives, and that's a major problem. I can quote here a Swiss economist, because in Switzerland there was a proposal going in that direction, Charles Wiplotz, who said, if you pay people for doing nothing, they will do nothing. And we go back to the incentive problem that you were very correctly, I think, raising. So I guess we don't have conclusive evidence, but it's a concept that has been very worked out theoretically. We know more or less what the pros and cons are. We just don't have practical experience, government experience with it.
Thanks very much. Now let me turn to Gunnar Hökmark and confront you, Gunnar, with what Jeremy Corbyn said in response to the question how he's going to finance all these high-flying plans of welfare, radically improving the NHS, the National Health Service, and nationalizing whole swathes of British industry, energy, and so on. And his simple answer was, well, corporations and rich people will have to pay a bit more taxes. That may have been an attempt at British understatement, but how about, let's phrase it more simply. Just tax the bloody rich to finance welfare in the future. How about that?
I think it is a fantastic idea. Then we can solve all problems. In my country, and in most other countries, we have taxes on alcohol or on cigarettes in order to make people drink less and smoke less. And if you want to have less rich people, it's a fantastic idea to tax them more. And in reality, socialists have always proven they have succeeded in this. Mm-hmm. The more they tax prosperity, the less prosperity they have. So it works. The more you tax, the less you will have. And that is, it's quite interesting that in most modern economies, you try to use the tax as some sort of incentive to do less. You subsidize people to do something more, and you tax them to do a little bit less. The higher taxes you have on jobs, the less jobs you will have. And the more you tax the rich, the fewer rich you will have. And the less prosperity. Let's be clear. We have seen this all over where.
We see it just now in Venezuela. That is a Corbyn country. And it's a failure, as they have failed everywhere. I think the interesting thing is, when we are looking ahead, that's a change that is not digital, it's not just disruption, but it's an ongoing change. And that is that human knowledge means more and more for prosperity. It might be that fewer people are working in producing a thing, but much more people are thinking about how to develop that thing. And that's quite an interesting thing, because that means that the richness is in some way being redistributed by the modern knowledge economy by itself. All of our brains are extremely much more important than they were 100 years in the old industrial economy, because then the industrial worker standing along the line, he or she was not supposed to do very much thinking. Now we're doing more and more thinking. And may I just, because of what has been said here, point to one thing, and that is in those economies we have developed modernization most. I'm not only speaking about automatization, but also digitalization. Those who are in the forefront, they have succeeded in having the highest levels of employment, while those who have stayed with old-fashioned manufacturing are having the lowest level of manufacturing. And in reality, it's interesting, we have globally, we have defeated extreme poverty in a way that no one could foresee 20 years ago. But in some of the more richer countries, we are building new poverty traps. Depending on how you deal with these universal income systems, it is one thing if you replace other subsidies with that. It's a package. That's one thing. But as a global vision that you can promise your citizens free income, then you must know that you as a state have a free income. And when I look around in Europe, I can truly say I see no member state of the European Union having a free income. They are mainly having deficits. And they have more deficits than they tend to account for, because the real deficits are in the future pensions. I think we need to work more. We need to earn more. And we can work more. And there is more work to be done.
Thanks very much. Now, we have about 35 minutes left. I'd like to open it up to the audience. Please ask questions, make comments. And yes, le monsieur avec le grand plan. Please, you're quite welcome to comment upon these almost Washington consensus-like pieces of rhetoric that we've heard here. We need a microphone. Nope. Sorry.
Well, the idea of an income for everybody is in Belgium already up since 10, 15 years or even longer. I think it's a very good idea under one condition, that the people don't get the money just like that. My idea, which I suggested to many politicians already, but without result, of course, should be that nobody should receive money without doing anything. And everybody able to do something for the society should be mobilized. For me, nobody should be walking along the streets during daytime when it's working time. And in this respect, I should agree that everybody gets a minimum income and get additional income according to what they realize. But my utopia should be that everybody is working, even the students should be allowed during vacation, and they should oblige the companies and the administration of the country that they take the young people in their offices for the time of their vacations so that they get experience. So mobilize everybody and give them money for that, a minimum which they should receive in your plans.
So Belgium has a 0% unemployment rate, I understand.
In my view, if they would apply it, yes. Yeah. At least Flanders.
The art of definition. Okay, we have a couple of volunteers. Minister, yes, sorry, we need to answer this.
I would like to say at first that I'm not saying that basic income is the answer, but I know that we need new solutions because our nowadays social security system, it doesn't work. It's too expensive and it's passive people. That's why we know that we have to do something. Actually, my party, Kokoomus, we have always been against basic income. But because it's now in our government program, now we are doing the pilot to see what kind of effects it might have. If we could find the system which encourages people to take the job, and if we could find the system how you can earn something and connect the benefits to that. Maybe you can be the entrepreneur, startup. There might be very, very interesting effects in this pilot, and I have decided to be open-minded for this. But the working and work, it's the social security #1, always.
Thanks very much. Gunnar.
Roland, you said in the beginning when you started this discussion that we have the problem that everyone is waiting for the lunch. I have a sad message. There ain't no free lunches. No. And if you think you have a free lunch, you're wrong. But in the end, someone has to pay for that lunch. And the question is always, who is to pay for the free incomes? Someone who has income. And this is exactly the problem of the European economy. We have too many people dependent on different security systems. Too few people able to enter the labor market. And what I would like to see is that we, in order to understand the new modern economy, are lowering the thresholds for the labor market. Instead, we are, in most of our countries, which is paradoxical, we are leveling you up. It is becoming more and more difficult to enter the labor market for immigrants, for young people, for those who are not having a full education. We have highered the thresholds. I think that's quite wrong, to be modest. It's extremely wrong. We should open up the labor markets and make it possible for those students to do something that is contributing to the economy. I don't belong to those who say that let's give them a spade so they can walk around, because that's no value in walking around with a spade. They need to do real work. And we all need to do that. We need to work till we are 75 years, or till, why not use a good figure, 100 years? Let's not despair of that, because the labor market is changing. I think it's paradoxical that most of our pension schemes in Europe, they were established 80 years ago, when the average living time was 55 or something like that. And now we're having more or less the same age for retirement as then, that we are living 20 years more, or even 30 years more. They, at that time, worked in factories and in mines, and rather tough, hard work. Now a lot of the works are just about thinking, designing, or taking care, using experience. We should adapt to that more than to try to establish free lunches.
Yeah, talking about free lunches, once actually Milton Friedman was invited for lunch by a colleague, and after he had paid for it, he triumphantly turned around to Milton Friedman and said, "See, there was a free lunch." Upon which Milton Friedman said, "That's not true. I had to listen to you for 2 hours." So there is nothing for free. We take a couple of voices from the floor in a row, and we start with you, sir. Yes, and you. 4 on this side.
Allow me to be provocative again. Abundance and scarcity, what's in a name? It's defined by money. Isn't it time to go beyond the illusion that the value of people is defined by money? So we live in extraordinary times. Let's take the challenge and reinvent the meaning of work. You said we have to work more, but what kind of work, sir? The people living on this planet are stressed out, are burnt out, are not happy with the work they do. So isn't it time to reinvent all these and not only concentrate on the brain? What about the heart of the people, sir?
Okay, we get to the lady right next to you.
So in the United States, we do have a very flexible labor market, low minimum wages, etc. We also have a whole lot of working poor who are very poorly cared for in our social safety net. So there's some difficulties in terms of what you're saying about opening up the labor market. We also have increasing income inequality, which has torn apart the fabric of our society. So that's another big problem that I'd love to hear your thoughts on.
Mm-hmm. Sir, yes.
In Belarus, our government, instead of creating new jobs and developing welfare system, decided to tax so-called social parasites. It's just people who don't work officially or don't work at all, including housekeepers and so on. How do you like the idea?
Mm-hmm. Those very interesting ideas. Marketa, right in the first row, right here. No, sorry. Straight, yes.
All Flynn's blondes look the same like they did in the US Oval Office. I was lacking a little bit from the analysis of the fourth industrial revolution aspect. If all the works will be digitalized, we will actually lose quite a lot of labor, which means income taxes. So what is your take? You're just coming from the ECOFIN meeting. Are you talking about platform regulation, taxing of digital services? Where are we with the cyber tax and all these things? If you could open that, would be fantastic.
Yeah, and then there's a gentleman behind you, right there.
Robert Buttery, Head of International Relations, University of Applied Sciences, Northwestern Switzerland. Yes, basic income, universal basic income. There was a referendum in Switzerland, 77% voted against it. I think we do need to ask people what they think. But going to our Belgian colleague over there, I think we need to be reflecting more on vocational and professional training. Switzerland has an excellent system. Germany, Austria, our students are employed. And rather than fall in doom and gloom, invest in our young people. That's where our future is. We talk about innovation. We talk about incentive. Give it to the young people. I'm a total optimist. I work with young people. I see the amazing things that they can do. They're also very socially conscious. That's where money should be invested. And I think if we look at the European Union new program, Erasmus+, that is where money will be invested. Give us some more, please.
Thank you. More of the same. I'd like to, at this point, give our panelists an opportunity to respond. Please be selective. Just pick one or two of the points that were talked about. Let me just repeat the points. Reinventing the meaning of work, working poor, the idea of status of social parasites. What about loss of income tax and investing in youth? Federico, why don't you start?
Okay, if I can add maybe a little comment on the grand plan issue. You are adding a rather scary, I think, dimension to this whole basic income debate, because you are talking about a conditional basic income. In fact, you're not talking about an unconditional basic income that would be based on people doing something socially useful. So my question is, who decides what is socially useful? You know, in the market, you have a very simple way of deciding, right? Ultimately, what directs the allocation of societal resources within a market economy is consumers' preferences, so what people wish to buy and sell. So you have, by following market incentives, you are implicitly serving what people would like to be served of. But in that sort of society, it's the grand plan that decides. It's the government that decides. I'm not sure it's a utopia. It seems a bit more like a dystopia to me. On the issue of the value of work defined by money, I think, again, there is a fundamental misunderstanding of what markets are about. I mean, free markets are about the allocation of resources. How do we best allocate scarce resources to satisfy human wants? They are neutral as to the type of wants that have to be satisfied. So they don't define any value as such. It is people, operators in the market, who decide what to do with the wealth that is produced and what values to pursue with that wealth. So I don't think you can blame a system that is about how to allocate societal resources for pursuing whatever ends. I mean, the markets are, it's a technology, if you want. It's about means. It's not about ends. The ends is still human operators who decides them. And the last point on vocational and professional training, I think it's important. To be honest, I have the feeling that in this city, education is a silver bullet to solve all sorts of social and economic problems. It's a bit exaggerated, I think. It's a universal solution to everything. But you are right that in the presence of the transformation that we are seeing, we will need to modify school curricula to an extent in order to include more digital skills. We will need good agencies for reskilling. What I have always pleaded for is a future-oriented classical education. You know, let's not transform schools into employment agencies, because they are not just that. It's about always also forming human beings and citizens who are able to adjudicate, as you were saying, basic moral dilemmas. And let's not throw away the whole tradition of Western studies to just introduce coding and fashionable new topics. So let's be careful what we do with the school system.
Giga. Yeah, first about the hearts of the people and so on. I think the hearts of the people want to work. People who have a job are happier than people on welfare, even if the material levels are the same. And you can just look at for example, at the American Indian reservations. Everybody on welfare, everybody unhappy, everybody fat and drinking. On automation, I like this quote by Eric Schmidt to people. The future is not computer instead of you. The future is you with a computer, and that's where education and all that comes in. Technology killing jobs. I mean, look